session at this time. We need to have at least 3 commissioners present before we can start. So, at ease.
So it'll be a few more minutes before we get going, but we'll be going shortly. Thanks. third commissioner confirmed on their way, so please bear with us. Thanks.
I'd like to call this meeting of the Albany Transportation Commission to order. I'll start with, I guess we'll start with the roll call.
Commissioner Barnes is absent. Commissioner Jamado?
Present.
Commissioner McCroskey?
Present.
Commissioner Peng is absent. Chair McCroskey?
Chair
Sorry, Chair Chomsky, sorry.
Present.
Habit.
And now we'll do a land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. Now we move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is general public comment. If anybody would like to speak for up to 3 minutes on an item that is not on tonight's agenda, this is the time to do it. If you would like to speak about an item that is on tonight's agenda, you can wait until we cover that item, and then you'll have a chance to speak, and we can actually engage about it. But right now, this is for anything not on the agenda. Would anybody in the room like to speak on an item not on the agenda?
One online. Sounds like there's an online comment.
And is there an online comment?
We do have one hand raised online.
Okay.
It's not letting me do it. Can you open? Go to participants.
Care to start a pool?
Jeremiah Pinguelo, please go ahead. Jeremiah, we can't hear you.
you.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. So, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the meeting. Yeah, so I was just want to say, planning and zoning, public property and zoning meeting. There was the big talk about street parking and having, where our residents pay for parking, citywide parking permits. And I don't know why it was on last night's agenda. I think I sent a few emails a couple months ago about how the planning and zoning, they do a lot of parking exemptions, and they have a lot to do with on-street parking. And they had a consultant there last night and everything, and they were on the agenda item for almost 45 minutes. And so they're going to be, I guess, recommending something to City Council about on-street parking. And I was really confused because I thought planning and zoning had to do with private property, everything to do on that side of the sidewalk, and then anything on the roads, on the streets, like parking your cars, had to do with transportation. So I was just raising awareness with the commission tonight, and maybe city staff, about if this commission can have something to say with, whether or not cars park, on the street and all that sort of stuff. I was just kind of confusing last night. Because planning and zoning, they do parking exemptions, and then it directly affects cars parking on the streets, which is this commission's task. They were talking about having residents pay for parking permits citywide, and it just had nothing to do with planning and zoning. It was more about this commission. So just want to raise awareness about that. And last but not least, I noticed tonight the 15-mile-an-hour slow zone around schools is not on the agenda. I think last month there was no Transportation Commission meeting. But I know the month before it was on the agenda, the 15-mile-an-hour slow zone around schools, to bring it back for discussion. So I was just wanting to remind everybody, maybe, I can use my public comment now to request for future agenda items that maybe next month we could talk about 15-mile-an-hour slow zones around the schools. And maybe has this commission reached out to anybody in the school district to get their input? Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
We don't have any other hands raised at this time.
Okay, let's move on to item 3-1, monthly police data on collisions and citations.
Thank you, Chair Chomsky. I'm reporting tonight on 2 months of collision data. This is for the months of February and March. There was 1 pedestrian-involved collision reported in February and 2 in March. There were 0 bicycle-involved collisions in February and 1 in March. In February, there were 9 reported collisions, 4 of which were listed as injury collisions, and in March there were 14 collisions, 7 of which were reported as injury collisions. Moving citations, 25 were issued in February and 33 were issued in March. And there was 1 DUI arrest made in February and 2 in March. And that concludes my report on the police data.
Are there any questions from commissioners? Would anybody like to make public comment on this item? Anybody in the room? Oh, yes, we do have someone in the room. Can you please stand at the microphone there so that everyone online will be able to hear you clearly?
I'm sorry, Harry. I would like to make a comment. I can do it later.
Okay.
The graph showed quite a reduction in tickets given to motor vehicles. Is there a reason why there's so many fewer than in years prior?
Any other public comment from folks in the room? Any public comment from people online?
We do have 1 hand raised online. Jeremiah Pinguelo, please go ahead.
Yeah, just wondering, accidents occurred. I know you get these reports about collisions. It would be nice to get the location. You know, where these DUI arrests were made. Was it, 1 block away from a local tavern or restaurant, Solano, that was, serving the alcohol? Or was it, more in residential area, like around a school, around a preschool, or around middle school? It would be nice that if the reports included a location. That way there's good data with locations. Thank you.
And I would like to draw the commission's attention to 1 public comment on this item that we received an email today where the commenter asked us to specifically call out collisions that involved electric personal transportation devices. So I guess I'll bring it back to, well, first of all, are there any sort of factual matters that were raised as questions that you want to address?
Yeah, so the reduction in citations has been discussed by the commission in the past. The police department has indicated that in the past there were resources that were dedicated towards issuing citations and enforcing speeding that have gone away over time, and that has led to decreased patrol capacity for issuing citations.
Okay, Commissioner Barnes.
If the message you just addressed was from Judy Kerr, then that's what I wanted to discuss, so I think we're good.
Did you want to make further comments about that, or just raise the fact that?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I think it's a good idea. I'm not sure how feasible it is. This is something this particular person, who is a member of one of our other commissions and is an advocate for disabled people, has concerns about. And as a cyclist too, I've had some cyclists complain about e-bikes, for example, going too fast. That's peripheral, but in general, as the types of battery-powered vehicles grows over time, there's going to be all sorts of interactions that we may not really be prepared to capture. So it's a long-term problem too, and I don't know how feasible it is to address it, but it's out there.
I'll just say that I've relayed the inquiry to the police department, and we'll follow up with them on how those vehicles are documented currently in the citations, whether we can separate those or follow up with them.
And I think the comment from the public was also related to that, which is to try to understand better what locations these incidents occurred at. Is that something we can?
So that's not something we've had the capacity to report out on a monthly basis, but the commission takes a deeper dive in the collision data, generally annually, to look at the spatial collisions.
Okay.
And go further in depth over where we see a lot of collisions or issues to raise.
I was just going to comment, perhaps my historical view, such as it is. In the past, we used to have a police lieutenant come and periodically present this data to us. This summary is kind of in lieu of having that personnel here. My kind of recollection from when we had that person here, the police department is monitoring the data. It's not just something that, by the way, they happen to have, but they pay attention to it. So if they do see trends, they're not waiting for us to point them out. I think this is more to satisfy our curiosity and be aware if someone says, oh, I heard of a collision, we can say, yes, we're seeing the trends in the general data. So seeing the information on the electric mobility devices, certainly figuring out where that fits into this, it might be that the default police reporting puts them into pedestrian or bike categories, things of that nature. Certainly something to follow up with the police department, see how they capture and can report it. But I do want to share, I feel comfortable that in the past, the police department has tracked patterns, and when they see something troubling, they will generally deal with it or bring it to our attention. So I'm willing to give a little bit of leeway and less make work for them if that's what it turns into. Beyond that, I love data, so all of these things are things I would love to have, but I recognize someone has to put it together. So just wanted to share that.
Sure, it would be great to see everything all the time, but we don't actually have time to analyze it all the time either. Yearly seems appropriate for me. I'd rather not be reactionary to specific events unless they're drastic and point out a larger issue. And I'll say that we're in a pretty good position right now because we just recently completed the local road safety plan. So we have a really good view of several years of data that's available.
Any other discussion? Okay, I don't have anything to add. Those are great points. Let's move on to item 4, the consent calendar, which consists of just approving the minutes. So does anybody wish to discuss that item, or shall we? I don't hear any calls to discuss that. Let's make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
I think you actually.
I'm asking for a motion.
Oh,
Right, but since it's on the consent calendar, I think you have to start with pulling it from the consent calendar to discuss, and the public can actually do that as well.
Okay. Would anybody in the public like to pull item 4-1 from the consent calendar for discussion? Okay, then we have, can someone make a motion to approve the consent calendar?
so moved.
I'll second.
Okay. We have a roll call.
Commissioner Barnes,
Aye.
Commissioner Javindel,
Aye.
Commissioner McCroskey,
Aye.
Chair Chomsky.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, now we come to the exciting part of the meeting, discussion of possible action on matters. And the first one is item 5-1, pavement maintenance slurry seal project.
So I'm going to invite up Cesar Lara, manager with Unico Engineering, to kick off this presentation.
I'm Cesar Lara with Unico Engineering. Thank you, Commission and Commissioners, for having me. Just a brief background on my experience. I worked 14 years for a pavement management company, or pavement maintenance company, specialized in emulsions, so did quality control with oil, and then we applied all the products that are used in pavement preservation. And so from there, transitioned to the engineering consulting side. Now I'm a consultant, been doing that the last 5 years, and actually am contracted with the city to pick out their roadways and put together a slurry seal project. So with that, I'll get into the presentation. I'm going to give a 101 and a theory real quick on what preservation is and how it works. And then I'll go into some examples, and then a little bit of the money talk. Next slide. So pavement preservation, what it is, it's keeping the good roads good. You're investing money into a road that's in pretty good shape, not failed, but you're protecting your asset. Behind me are two examples. One's a chip seal, and bottom one is a fog seal, City of Napa and El Dorado County. Next slide. So the theory, right treatment, right pavement, right time. Next slide. The graph that you're seeing behind me is the curve of the road deterioration. So when an overlay is built, 2 to 4 inch overlay, the lifespan of an overlay is anywhere from 15 to 20 years. So on the left side of the graph, showing the dollar amount that it'll cost you to bring that road up back to 100, and then the time out. So the preventative trigger that you see is when is ideal to put money back into your road. You know, it costs millions of dollars, or $30, $40, $75 a square yard to build. So as you see the curve go down, a road that's brand new is 100 PCI. As it starts to go down, the PCI goes down. So the preventative trigger is anywhere in that 50 to 75 to 80 PCI range that you're recommending treatments. So it's like painting the wood on your house is kind of like you should look at your overlay as the asset. An overlay should last a lot longer than 20 years, same as the wood at your house. The key is sealing it. So continually sealing it, protecting it from weather and sun. Next slide. So this just shows you the different types of treatments that you can apply depending on the severity of the roadway or the condition of the PCI. And I'll go into it a little bit, but crack fill, fog seal, chip seal, and slurry, polymer modified 2-layer lifts, and then you get into your rehab or your reconstruction where you're doing overlays, mill and fills, and full depth reclamation. Next slide. These are your typical costs for pavement preservation treatments. As you can see, the cheapest being about 25 cents to 75 cents a square yard. And even on the most expensive high-end preservation treatment, it's still only about $10 a square yard. Greatly different than doing an overlay. Next slide. So best way to show you this is an example of a city. The example I have is a 300 lane mile road with their budget being 1.5 million. In my first scenario, the breakdown will be $1 million going to reconstruction, so overlays and whatnot, and then the 500,000 that's left over going into preventative maintenance or keeping the good roads good. Next slide. So in our first example, I put down a 3-inch mill and fill, which is 3 to 4 inches, pretty common in most cities. When you do the math on it, it gives you about 5.7 lane miles for that $1 million. When you look down at the cost breakdown of the pavement maintenance, $4 a square yard is usually a 2-layer system. You get about 17.8 lane miles, so a considerable difference in lane miles. And the total lane miles repaired is 23.5, and the most important number to that is the road cycle. And what the road cycle is, the next time when you build a roadway, the next time that you have gone through your entire network and come back to your roadways is now 13 years later. And a lot can happen to a road in 13 years. Next slide. So what happens when you flip it? When you put that 500,000 into reconstruction, you now go from constructing 5.7 lane miles to 2.8, so roughly half, right? But when you put that $1 million into maintenance, you're now covering 35.5 lane miles as opposed to that 17. So considerably more roads are being covered and protected. And the most important number on that is that life cycle now is down to 8 years. What I tell agencies all the time is a roadway that's already in really bad condition isn't going to get much worse 2 to 3 years later, but that road that's right on that trigger line, it's really critical to put the money into it and salvage that roadway. Next slide. The example that I have was a city in Marin County called City of Novato. When they started doing preservation was in 2003. They started using slurry seals and cape seals. And you can see as the years went on, their PCI started to raise up. So what they were doing is they were covering their network, even on some of the more distressed roadways with pavement preservation. And when I talked to them in 2015, I had called the city engineer up and she told me, we're caught up. So it took quite a bit of years, but what caught up meant was they had sealed and preserved their entire network, where now the following year coming into it, they had millions of dollars to put into ADA. They had millions of dollars to do their collectors and arterials in their city, doing overlay. Not saying that overlay isn't needed, but now they had the funding to do that. Next slide. So this is just a slide that says keys to success. It starts from the top with city council, public education. Dedicated funds is having it be an every year or every other year thing at a minimum. When you wait 5 years to do maintenance again, then you fall down and the PCI goes out in your city. Good products and workmanship and contractor relationship is kind of what your city does already with inspection, consulting, and making sure that it's being done right. Next slide. So here are the treatments again in order of when you would be used, which I should have put earlier. Next slide. So this is the map of the current PCI condition of the city of Albany. It's hard to tell, but the green and blue category streets are in good shape. And then you have a lot of streets in the good, poor, and very poor network. So what I was looking at as a consultant for the city is I went out and I reviewed all the good and poor streets to select candidates for the upcoming slurry. Next slide. Ideally, you want streets in good PCI, but what do you do with the streets that are on the border? You might not have the money to be doing an overlay. And then in residential areas where you don't get a lot of traffic and putting a big investment like an overlay, not a waste of money, but if you want to cover more lane miles, preservation is the way to go. Next slide. So there are some streets here in the city of Albany that look like this, and what you're looking at is just heavy distress. It's called alligator cracking. But still structurally, the road is in good shape. We're doing a low-cost maintenance treatment and extend your pavement life and give you the flexibility down the road to put money in other areas. Next slide. One thing that the city of Albany is doing right now is before any treatment's done, they're going out, any seal is done, they're going out and they're doing dig-out repairs. So on a stretch of road that isn't a good candidate, might have a couple areas that are failing or not doing well, they go in and they do a localized dig-out repair, bringing the road out into a good condition to do a seal. Next slide. And then crack fill is your number one or your first line of defense. Keeping water from getting down below into the subgrade and ruining the road from the bottom up is what you're trying to prevent. Back to like sealing your house, right? Next slide. I'm going to go through some examples of just some neighboring cities that are using these treatments, even on lower PCI roadways, and getting 5, 7, 10 years of protection. So first one, the city of Martinez. Next slide. On a road that was a PCI of 49, so pretty low. When you look back at the map, in those orange and red categories, that usually falls in that arena. With the city of Martinez in particular, they didn't have the funding, so they were looking for a different solution. So they tried the two-layer micro-surfacing system. You can see the size of the cracks and the distress of the roadways, and then down below the 7-year later picture on a maintenance treatment that only cost them about $5 a square yard installed and got 7 years of protection. I live in Martinez, and that's a 12-year mark and still looking great. Next slide. And here's just another example. PCI 51 farther down the road. Next slide. And then the last slide, just the stresses for it, and then the 7-year mark. Next slide. Here's another example of a single layer. You can see the amount of distress going down. Next slide. And then there's your final product, much like what the City of Albany is planning to do this summer. Next slide. Here's a worst case scenario, and I put this in here because this is actually going to be a 2-layer system. PCI 33, that's an overlay. When you look at a road that's that distressed, the right recommendation as a consultant would be you need to overlay this, you need to reconstruct this, it needs to be replaced. This is in a residential area, not a lot of traffic. The city had a lot of needs in arterials and collectors that they needed to do overlay on, and so they didn't have the budget to do the residentials. So they decided to do a 2-layer microsurfacing system, which still was under the $6 a square yard installed. Next slide. This is right after construction. The way PCI works is when a treatment is put down, it then gets a bump up in PCI rating. So next slide. 7 years later, you can see the condition of it is still amazing in the residential area. So it's a really real-world solution for residential areas, and it actually helps you get ahead of that curve of having these bad streets and your maintenance streets and kind of changing that outlook. Next slide. And here's another 49. Next slide. And then next slide. Here's your 7 years later. So a lot done with preservation. Next slide. This is my old one. Okay, this is just another example. This is Lake County doing a 3-layer system, and you can go to the next slide. So they did a 3-layer system on a roadway that was an absolute rip-up. Did an asphalt rubber or microsurfacing, asphalt rubber chip seals the 2nd layer, type 2 slurry over the top of it. Next slide. So single-layer systems with preservation, very cost-effective. You can cover a lot of roadway. And I didn't go into detail, but with multi-layer lifts, what that means is 2-layer preservation. It's still very cost-effective. The only thing with city and urban areas, what the Bay Area deals with a lot, is you have to have your ADA or curb ramp up to date. Once those are done and you put the investment in that, the world of being able to maintain your streets at a lower cost and raise your PCI really opens up. And the last slide. That's it. That's what I have.
I think David had a follow-up presentation. Oh.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioner. Good evening, attendees. So Caesar gave us the background for the general idea of pavement preservation, and my presentation will follow up with project specifics of how we packaged up the 2023 Slurry project. Next slide, please. Starting with the project scope, we're targeting a thin slurry application for our streets, and that slurry application will cover approximately 38,600 linear feet, or about 125,000 square yards. And to supplement the slurry, we're including base repair or digouts, assuming a 4-inch depth for the digouts, and covering about 18,000 square feet where base repair is needed. As mentioned, this is targeting a preservation treatment, so we will not be including any grading modifications. We will not be including any curb ramps as part of the project. For striping, we'll be asking the contractors to grind out existing striping prior to slurry application, and then after slurry is completed, they will go back and replace the existing, this is paint, but thermo, for the striping. So again, this is a grind out and replace with the existing striping, no changes in the configuration. The exception being existing crosswalks in the ATP pedestrian priority network will be replaced with a 444. And the last item is because of the widespread breadth of coverage in the city, we're looking to implement the approved red curb policy at intersections. Next slide, please. So I want to touch on the parameters that went into our street selection. First off, we targeted streets that were identified as candidates for pavement maintenance when I last presented to Commission back in May of last year. And these were, as a refresher, streets that were typically between PCI scores of 70 to 90, so they were already in generally good condition and good candidates for preservation treatment. After that, we looked at streets that were, like Cesar touched on, maybe a little bit below where we would normally target streets for preservation treatment, but with some localized base repairs or takeouts, we could extend the life of these streets with the efficiency gains instead of going for a full rehabilitation treatment. Finally, we looked at streets that had low PCI scores that, when doing field investigations, had very few structural issues identified and would still be good candidates for an overlay treatment for preservation or extending the life of that street. Streets that we did not include are streets where we have upcoming projects that are known. For example, Marin Avenue, we have the second half between Key Route and City Border. That's coming up. We did not include streets that had more complex transportation considerations, so Solano Avenue, Upper Solano and in the Hill. And also streets that we identified as good candidates for a multi-layer treatment that may trigger additional considerations. So we left those off of this project. Slide. So this is a map showing the coverage of the streets. As you can see, we have a lot of coverage over in the Albany Hill area. In the area of the city between San Pablo and Masonic, there's not so much coverage. We did complete a paving project this year, the 2022 Pavement Rehabilitation Project, which did cover several north-south running streets. And also, because we avoided locations with upcoming projects, one of them is an upcoming sewer project on Brighton, and actually some additional East Bay Mud pipeline projects. There's also a storm drain project coming up in the Albany Terrace area, so there was a Canada Street removed from that neighborhood. Next slide. So I added the slide to highlight the streets in purple are generally the pavement preservation candidate streets. But as you can see, included in this project is a lot of coverage of streets that back in 2022, when we had identified candidate streets, they were candidate streets for rehabilitation, more expensive treatment. So with this project, we're actually extending the life of streets where normally we would have spent a lot more money for and potentially have fallen behind on our pavement program. Next up, I want to cover a couple of examples of what we'll be doing in the 2023 Slurry project. So I included 3 locations. The first is the intersection of Stanage and Portland. So this is the current condition. And Stanage is generally in good condition. It's one of those streets that's in the mid-70s in PCI. But you can see that it's starting to see a little bit of wear over the years. Next slide. So this is depicting what it would potentially look like with a new slurry overlay. Because Portland is identified as part of the ATP pedestrian priority network, we are adding 444s going across the Slurry project limits. And also, the existing red curb in the area is going to be refreshed, and the red curb policy would be added to this intersection. Note that the stop paint is out of the frame of this picture. Next. Second example is up in the hill on Washington Avenue, where we have a speed table. This is what the existing looks like. So again, generally, okay condition, starting to show some wear, but could use a little bit of refreshing. So what it looked like after Slurry would be nice new surface, nice refreshed paint, and refreshed striping. And again, there would be no change in configuration of the striping, just adding to the existing back over on top of the Slurry layer. Third location is going to be the intersection of Jackson Street and Washington. So this is the existing condition. We actually came through on that 2022 pavement rehabilitation project on Jackson, which extended into the intersection. So we did get restriped 444s on the north and south crossings. With the limit of the Washington Avenue Slurry, include the crossings on the west and the east side. So next slide. Those crossings would then be renewed as 444s, yellow, having a nice new layer and a refreshed red curb. Next slide, please. So the targeted project schedule is, getting commission to review and recommend this project to council during this month's meeting. We're targeting the May 15th council meeting to go out to bid, with the bid opening in June and then construction targeted for start in August, September. This timeline is a little bit tight. These contractors do typically go out and complete the Slurry construction in summer before the next rainy season starts. And an August, September timeline would give us a narrow window to get construction started and finished before that rainy season. It's the end of my prepared slides, and I think what we'll do now is we'll take questions on both of our combined presentations.
Questions from the commission first. Fareed.
I noticed in your renderings you had 444s at a couple of the crossings with stop signs, and in the first one there was a stop limit line included in there. The one on Washington, I didn't see a limit line. I assume that's just something that was omitted from the rendering, but you would actually include those stop limit lines everywhere there's a 444 with a stop sign?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we can include the stop bars in front of crosswalks.
That's great. I just find that where there's 444s, having the additional stop limit line really reinforces for people that they do need to stop. It's something they're used to seeing, so keeping it there is good. Thank you.
Okay, I'm a little new at this, so this is a dumb question, but it needs to be asked. You're changing the color and the nature of the crosswalks. Is that the state of the art? Is that something that, were there legal issues around that? Talk to me about that.
Well, I think the idea is that, generally speaking, we would not be altering any color or any of the existing striping. The only item that would be altered is the structure of it. If there is a ladder crosswalk, like the example that I showed on Washington and Jackson, the configuration would be changed to a 444 to be up to date with our latest standards, but the color of it would not be changed.
So that was just part of the rendering? I mean, the crosswalks will look the same as they did before?
Except for the where there is a ladder type crosswalk in a pedestrian priority network, it it will be a 444 crosswalk instead.
Can you explain what a 444 crosswalk is?
Yeah, if we can go back to
Sorry.
the slide. Let's use the Washington and Jackson intersection, because that shows both.
And if you could also explain why the change from ladder to 444 is recommended, that would be helpful.
I could explain that
Yeah.
part.
I'll
honestly-
first explain the difference between the two. So in the photograph on the, I guess this is on the west side of the intersection facing east. So the west crossing and the east crossing, that's oriented north-south, those are our ladder crosswalks. On the north side and the south side of the intersection, that's on the photo left and photo right, those are our 444s, and those were recently put in as part of our paving project completed in March or April of this year. So the 444 crosswalks don't have the outer band, and they also have, don't have the thermo in the middle in the pedestrian path. So it provides a smoother surface for traversing the crosswalk
For the pedestrians?
for the pedestrians.
Okay. Because that's some kind of plasticized material, and if it gets wet, it's slippery.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there a written city policy that we prefer 444 crosswalks in all circumstances when possible? Or?
Well, I think Fried was wanting to speak to this, but I'll just say that the commission has over time, they're both acceptable Caltrans and high visibility crosswalks. So there's the basic, the lines on either side, and then there's a menu, I think now, of maybe 3 or 4 designs for high visibility crosswalks. For a time, the city preferred high visibility crosswalk was ladder, then it was continental, and now it's 444. So we have sort of various designs in various locations, and we're attempting to sort of bring them all up in areas that we want enhanced high visibility crosswalks to the 444 with this project.
And 444 really brings together 2 different concepts that we just heard about. One is the smooth path of travel for someone in a wheelchair, not having to go over the rumble strip of the thermoplastic, which can get fairly thick. It's noticeable, tactile. The other is slippery when wet, and if you ride a bike, which my son and I ride through this intersection on the way to school every day, crossing that lateral line can be a slick spot for you. So by removing that, you create a continuous asphalt path of travel across the crosswalk for someone on a bike, so they're not going to slip. And then using the crosswalk, someone in a wheelchair has a smooth path of travel. So you're providing both of those with openings to not go over the thermoplastic. And as Justin said, the high visibility of the 444 is for sort of the pedestrian priority crossings, not everywhere, because it's more material and it just costs more to do.
If I can add to that, also, there's a traction path for the pedestrian and wheelchair users, scooter users, kids on bikes, so they also get that traction through the intersection, so crossing either way.
I'm sorry, can you go back to one of the maps with the purple lines? That's good. Because just out of curiosity, I live on Curtis Street, which is the far upper right-hand border of that map, and you or someone slurry sealed my street 5 or 6 years ago. It was totally effective. We were all really happy with it. But I'm wondering, are you suggesting we have to do it again? What's the purple mean again?
Yes, purple are the streets that were selected for inclusion in the project. The idea is that although the street is in good condition, we want to maintain it that way with the slurry seal. And so over time, without any kind of treatment, then all streets start to deteriorate according to generally that curve that Caesar was showing in his preservation treatment presentation. So even though it has been recently sealed, we want to keep it in good condition. It's the idea of keeping good streets good.
So slurry seals then tend to happen every 6 to 8 years, depending on the amount of traffic on the street?
Yeah, 7 to 10 years, but it's less than, yeah.
Okay.
7 to 10 years.
Okay, and here's a dumb question. We're having, as like last winter, much bigger, stronger rainstorms. Is that going to be a cost issue going forward for pavement repair if this keeps up?
You can add to this, Caesar, if you want, but I think generally, if we do have wetter seasons and we do have faster deterioration of streets, as for specifically, how to quantify that, I think that's a more difficult question.
Well, most of us up here are cyclists, and you noticed after those big storms this winter, the roads are torn up. You really notice it more on a bicycle than a car. So I'm wondering, is this going to be something we have to factor in going forward? Something that might be more expensive because we have to do more street maintenance?
With the amount of weather, the streets that aren't sealed definitely get affected a lot more with the amount. And you're not alone. Every agency in the area does the same thing. So yeah, the water and it getting down below the subgrade is the worst thing that can happen.
All the more reason to keep them up to snuff.
Yes.
I think I noticed more in my car.
Any more questions from commissioners?
No.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. Is this kind of project something that's been done before in Albany, or is this a new approach for us?
This is something that we've done before. A project in 2018 jumps to mind where we slurry sealed Mona Avenue. And what we're trying to do, the intention is that this is going to be incorporated as one of the core pillars of our pavement maintenance program, along with more extensive designed rehabilitation projects and also patch paving that we can do where we can cut on and do overlays of areas that need more attention that a pavement preservation treatment might not be as effective in.
So would,
I'm sorry, what was that last? Preservation?
That where pavement preservation may not be an appropriate treatment, where we would do something more extensive like a patch.
so would it be fair to say that that Albany has used this technology for individual repairs in the past, but Albany hasn't done a comprehensive kind of planning process like what you're showing us tonight, where you go through the whole city and kind of figure out which streets are good candidates for this citywide? Is this the first?
I wouldn't say it's the first, but I do think that we're trying to get back to a model where we are doing rehabilitation treatments on streets that need it. But as we're doing that, we're also putting into our program these more regular pavement preservation and maintenance projects that we can then continue to keep the good streets good, like the graph that Caesar showed, where we have those high PCI streets.
Let me interject. I understand the goal, and you've explained it really well. What I'm trying to understand is, to what extent have we been doing this all along, and this is just another round of it? And to what extent is this a new concept for us that we're being asked to approve tonight?
I think when we're talking about history, Allison Carrillo, our CIP manager, can speak a little bit more about the history of that.
I think actually a few of you, well, most of you have predated me, actually, in terms of how long you've kind of been on this commission and seen these projects go out. We have done quite a few slurry seal projects over the years. 2018 was our latest, or most recent, before this one, and it covered a good swath of the city. I hope you don't mind. I'm better with visuals. There were portions in the northeast, portions here in the middle of the city on both sides of Solano Avenue, as well as a few other streets to the west of San Pablo Avenue, primarily targeting residential streets. Similarly, before that, now I had to go back and look at the records, but our moratorium list has shown that we've done similar slurry treatments, various types, like Caesar spoke about, since at least 2009, when we started kind of recording our maintenance treatments in our moratorium lists.
It's helpful. And my other question is also about history in Albany, or about kind of the timing of things in Albany. When you're presenting this, you're clearly explaining that there are some streets that are in bad condition that are not being, that haven't been part of this plan because they are not candidates for this kind of treatment. So when is the next time that Albany is planning to systematically take on a large-scale project like this to deal with those more problematic streets?
We're tackling them as we can, and as budget allows. So, for example, Marin is one street, which, you know, it's one of our major arterial streets, and it really, we ended up we're spending a lot of money to rehabilitate it, because it's one that's used so often. We're targeting that. There are certain streets in Albany that have poor PCI that we need to target. We actually, in front of our office, Cleveland Avenue, I don't know how many people drive up and down there. It's probably the worst street in Albany. I think it's a PCI of 9, single digits. But we've been working closely with Caesar to take on one of these thicker, multi-layer types of treatments. Cleveland Avenue, as an example, is one where ADA upgrades are not necessary. We can do much thicker kind of applications. And instead of spending a lot of money to do a rehab treatment, we can do one that functionally acts similarly, but one we can do for far less cost.
So it sounds like the major rehab is not done in a kind of a citywide plan like this with a big map showing all the stripes. It's more case by case as the money is available for individual problem streets.
We have streets that are currently on the plan list of rehabilitation, so beyond Marin Avenue. Other streets, Cleveland Avenue to the south of the I-80 overpass, so between, from Buchanan to the I-80 overpass, that's one's actively in design. That one includes, actually we came to the commission, that includes a separated bike lane. We went through that about a year ago. We have other streets similar that are on plan lists that we're kind of chipping it off as we can, and as budget allows. But the importance on these types of treatments is that while we're kind of slowly chipping off, is that we don't let others get into that condition.
Okay, that helps me understand the big picture of what's being done when over the years instead of just what we're doing right now in this project. Thank you. Is there any public comment on this item from people in the room? No? Any public comment from people online?
We do have one hand raised. Jeremiah Pinguelo, please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Yeah, just real quick regarding that intersection, was that Jackson and Washington? I think it's yellow because it's around a school. So anything next to a school is always yellow crosswalks, and the rest are white, except for the rainbow-colored one by Cornell. I think all the crosswalks around schools should be rainbow-colored instead of yellow, way more visible. But anyway, besides that, you got all these purple lines on the map, and these are streets that you want to redo. When was the last time we redid those streets? So do you have any information or data on, let's say, Pierce Street? That was just paved, what, 3 years ago? Pierce Street is fine. Pierce Street is great. I don't see anything wrong with it. I mean, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? You might as well fix Cleveland in the 9s and bring that up to 100. I think it's a waste of money and a waste of time. All that construction, all the traffic jams on Pierce Street, I just think that's not really the best use of all this money. Pierce Street is fine. That's a great street. I would do Cleveland because it obviously needs improvement. It's just making more wear and tear on our public vehicles or for our public works. every time they drive up and down that, it's just wearing on the shocks and just making our public works vehicles degrade a lot faster. Also, you know, Cleveland, you get off the exit, and it's like, hey, get off the freeway, welcome to Albany. Oh gosh, look at this number 9. You know, the road doesn't look good when you get off the freeway. It's not very nice. Welcome to the city. You know, Cleveland all the way down to underneath the freeway, all the way to the USDA, coming up to that stoplight. That's where it needs to be done. Have you guys ever made that turn, getting off the Albany exit, and you go underneath the underpass by the USDA, and you're sitting at that stoplight waiting to merge on Buchanan? Those potholes are terrible right there. That's a disaster. That's what needs to be fixed. So yeah, so basically I would fix Cleveland Avenue for sure. Also, I'm all for rainbow striping, crosswalks around schools. And when was the last time all these roads, all these purple lines were fixed? Do we have that data?
Thank you for your comment. Is that the last of the public comment?
Yes, we don't have any other hands right now.
Okay, I'll bring it back to the commission. Someone like to start?
I just want to say,
Go ahead.
makes sense to me. Thank you for the good presentation. And also thank you for the repaving of that slip lane from underneath the Buchanan overpass there by the USDA. That's much better along the fence. Thank you.
Do we need a cost estimate on this?
That'll be presented to City Council, but we're just looking for the project recommendation
Okay.
here.
Yeah, thanks for the info. Interesting.
I want to throw in my thanks as well. Pretty clear from the presentation that pavement preservation is going to get us the most coverage. And for example, if we took a street like Pierce and instead of preserving the good condition pavement, went and tried to fix a bad condition Cleveland, we would let all of Pierce get worse and fix maybe a block of Cleveland, and the rest of Cleveland would still be horrible. So the punchline I'm taking away from the presentation is don't do that because you'll waste your money. Keep the good stuff in good shape so it doesn't all become Cleveland throughout the entire city. So taking that as the message behind all this, I think it's a great strategy and really looks to keep more of the city in good shape so that we can do the very minimal, most cost-effective pavement preservation rather than having to go rebuild and reconstruct streets at much, much greater cost, and we would never catch up. So again, I think it's great. Chair, if you have any comments, go ahead. Otherwise, I'd be ready to move this.
I would just like to echo everything that Fareed said, and thanks for the clear explanation. It's very clear listening to this how this way of spending money is a much more effective strategy in the long run. So you've made the case, and I'm ready for a motion.
Well, I would move that we recommend this 2023 pavement preservation program to the City Council for approval.
I'll second. Any discussion? I'll take a roll call.
Commissioner Barnes?
Yes.
Commissioner Javando?
Aye.
Commissioner McCroskey?
Yes.
Chair Chomsky?
Yes.
Motion carries.
And that concludes item 5-1. Thank you very much. So we move on to item 5-2, and I need to recuse for this entire item. So I will leave the room, and I'll let the rest of you duke it out for who gets to lead.
It's true, our vice chair is not here tonight.
In that case, I think that the former chair should take the lead.
You know, I'm always happy to lead if that's okay with you, Commissioner
Now-
Barnes.
Can we get a clarification? Does anyone else have to leave during this part of the presentation?
Not for this item, no. The next item will take actions one at a time where there are commissioner conflicts, but not this one.
I think who's ever already got this part of the agenda queued up should do it.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Are you saying yes?
I say go for it.
Okay, great. You could do the next one, okay. It sounds like we might all get a turn tonight. So we're going to move on to item number 5.2, the concept for Santa Fe and Key Route intersection safety improvements. And I believe we have a staff report or a consultant presentation, or both. This is where the music starts playing.
It was Jeopardy, right?
It's generic now. It's like Kleenex.
Thank you, Chair. Or Acting Chair McCroskey. So this item is a presentation of a concept for the Santa Fe and Key Route intersection for safety improvements. And I will kick off some context and then hand it over to our consultant designer. So for background, really what's spurring this is we've heard, the commission has heard, and staff has heard over time, safety concerns about this intersection, the length of the crossing, not having a crosswalk, and vehicle speeds. That the comparison to nearby similar intersections where their treatments were installed, but not at this intersection. And we've looked at other considerations, including emergency vehicle turning movements and driveway access for properties abutting the intersection. Additional background context here is that Santa Fe is both on the skeleton sidewalk and pathway network, as well as the broader, more complete network in the active transportation plan, and is it's Sharo, fast bikeways in the active transportation bike network. We did just complete a local roadway safety plan. There weren't any reported injury collisions at this intersection, neither during the 5-year period of the local roadway safety plan and looking back at a longer window to 2011 in the TIMS database that we review annually. The Santa Fe corridor, though, has seen injury collisions enough to merit being identified as in the high injury network in our recently approved local roadway safety plan. The other context here is that we did take a look at several of the blocks on Santa Fe, and the 1100 block was included as a block requesting traffic calming and had volumes of vehicles traveling over 25 miles per hour to lead to a recommendation from this commission to be reviewing traffic calming measures for the corridor. The final bit of context before I hand it over is the comparison to the other intersections that have similar angled askew sort of juncture with Santa Fe. At Ramona, there was a treatment where separates the Ramona approach to Santa Fe, southbound vehicles sort of going on one side of a triangle, and then incoming westbound, northbound vehicles approaching along to split up the crossing into two, and then have a traffic calming island in the middle of the roadway, taking advantage of not having parking lane through that intersection to narrow the Santa Fe vehicle lanes heading north and south. Similar treatment at Pomona. The one thing we have heard regarding this design is that the fire department finds it difficult to navigate, to maneuver. So they asked us to look at other alternatives as part of our project here. And then the other context, James will present a little more information on this on the next item, but sidewalk repairs are needed at the north end of the juncture between Santa Fe and Key Route, and they're triggering upgrading the curb ramp on the heading along the west side of Santa Fe, approaching this large crossing. So we're looking at this concept now to inform that near-term repair work, as well as look to implement the rest of the concept as a future project. And with that, we asked Andrew Lee with Parisi Transportation Consulting, now Parametrics, to develop a quick build and permanent concepts to give us flexibility in looking at how we implement this that really address the right-of-way, safety, crossing, visibility, and vehicle speeds. And with that, I will hand it over. Let me pull up his slides. Hold on.
Okay. Good evening, commissioners and staff. Thank you, Justin, for setting that up. I'm Andrew Lee with Parisi Transportation Consulting, which is now a division of Parametrics, and I'm pleased to present some of our conceptual ideas on this important intersection. Next slide, please. Justin set the context for me, so this is a vicinity map on the left here showing our steady intersection of Key Route and Santa Fe. Some of the issues that came to our attention when we looked at this, for one, is that with the skewed approach of these two streets, there is a very, very large unmarked crossing. It's approximately 110 feet on the west side of Santa Fe, and there are no marked crosswalks. There doesn't have that interruption in the pedestrian path of travel that Ramona and Pomona have. And so a person that is traversing this intersection, particularly on foot, is in a very long crossing that's unmarked, and it's a very large area for people in cars to navigate through. Largely, it's not well defined because the striping also is pretty worn, and there are no raised features to indicate proper channelization. And given that, we started looking at some of the constraints or some of the considerations. For one, intersections tend to provide superior sight distance when they are aligned to each other at approximately 90-degree intersections. And this being closer to like a 30 to 40-degree intersect, a person in a car driving southbound on Key Route has to look over their shoulder in order to see traffic coming southbound on Santa Fe, and having that angle of intersect makes things more challenging for them to also track people possibly crossing Santa Fe on the other side of the street, and making sure that they're paying proper attention to other users that are susceptible outside of drivers. So with that, next slide, please. Started taking a look at some of the vehicles that we could expect to normally traverse this intersection. A box truck, a SU-30 design vehicle, is probably on the larger side of things, but they do come through residential streets. They're somewhat of a proxy for a large Amazon or FedEx design delivery truck. And then we also wanted to look at what a large end design vehicle could look like. And so we took a model of a hook and ladder fire truck and also ran that through here. And what we can see with these large vehicle turns is that this intersection, given its angle, actually has a lot of space to squeeze inward and still allow for these large vehicles to comfortably make this turn. And so given that, the areas that I've shaded in blue indicate areas where we think that they could be reallocated into something else besides roadway. And we wanted to also see if this could afford other additional benefits like angling the intersection so that it's closer to a 90-degree intersect, and thereby also reduce the exposure area for somebody on foot if they were to cross the street going from north to south. Given that, next slide, please. We developed a quick build concept that largely replicates that shaded area that we showed on the prior slide. And the idea here is that if we were trying to implement a improvement or a concept that is that did not require moving the existing curbs and gutters or widening out the sidewalk, that there could be something that could be done using materials like paint, thermoplastic, pavement coloring, raised posts, and sometimes rubber curbs to narrow the intersection both in a visual sense for people driving, but also to channelize people walking and provide them a somewhat protected area that lessens their exposure to oncoming traffic. So this is our quick build alternative. We do notice that there, where the pedestrian path of travel would be continuing across the intersection, that there would likely need to be some sort of curb ramp to allow for an accessible path of travel. These curb ramps don't currently exist. I'll add one more thing is that these little black circles that you show indicate raised posts, and I did leave some of the posts out to leave open the opportunity or consideration for the homeowners in front of these streets for that top left corner in particular, that would be the southwest corner, that those areas could be maintained for some on-street parking if absolutely desired, or this could also be reallocated and closed off as well. But those yellow areas, I want to emphasize, are not decided in any way as to what kind of feature it could be, whether raised, painted. It's sort of a open flex space that could use some more planning and discussion. Next slide, please. And then the corner reconstruction concept that we show here is more of a permanent concept that would require reconstructing this intersection to have new curb, gutter, and sidewalks. We also see that we would find the opportunity to construct new curb ramps on the west side of Santa Fe. The flex space that was previously indicated with the color treatment could be changed to a planted area, some other form of landscape, a stormwater collection and retention zone. These are all possibilities. And then you'll also notice on Santa Fe going north and south, given the concerns about high-speed traffic, that we show in this concept a new crosswalk on the north leg, and that is the right side of the exhibit, going across Santa Fe with a raised island. And then we indicate that the presence of that island with some traffic striping so that oncoming vehicles know that this turns into a slower zone with the crossing in the street. We tried to shape the placement of the islands so that they would not interfere with the existing residential driveways, tried to maintain access in both directions to the greatest extent possible. And we do also have areas where we have indicated that parking would need to be prohibited in order to provide adequate sight lines near the corner and also near the crosswalks. Next slide, please. I think that concludes my presentation. Here to take questions.
Commissioners.
Sure. Now, I know staff had told us the fire department had some concerns about Pomona, whichever one is the most northerly. That's actually Ramona. Is it Ramona or Pomona that they had trouble with?
Both.
They're a similar
They're
design.
pretty similar.
Yeah, no, I'm looking
Sorry.
at them right here now on Street View. So that's, all right, so that's the reason we can't do something similar here. Okay, I really don't have any other questions for now.
So my question is just, would you suggest using the quick build as a first phase to test the configuration, have the fire department be able to drive through it a few times and say, hey, we like it, or could you scoop this over 6 inches kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think if it's installed with paint treatment, for instance, that's actually very effective way to see how the vehicle tracking goes over, and sometimes you get a larger than expected vehicle come through, or maybe we're just a little too aggressive with the models trying to squeeze out inches and it doesn't work out so well. It's a good tool to evaluate final placement of permanent features.
Thanks.
I had a question about the travel lines, projected travel lines. Could we go back to the slide that showed those? When you say a hook and ladder truck, is that a single driver as opposed to a 2-driver fire truck?
I think that one, a hook and ladder would typically be a 2-driver truck, and I may be incorrect that I'm not sure we modeled the 2-driver actually.
Well, I'm looking at the travel between southbound Santa Fe to northbound Key Route, and there's almost, on the right-hand side of the illustration, there's almost a little hook in the path, and I guess that could be explained by the 2-driver. It just seems odd to me that there's space in the intersection that doesn't get utilized.
Yeah,
Could you
we
explain that?
were also trying to keep the fire truck from encroaching into the opposing lane.
Great. Yeah,
That's the reason why there's a bit of a wobble there.
interesting. Okay.
We could design it to be a bit more aggressive if the fire truck is allowed to go into the opposing lane. That certainly does happen. But we didn't want to presume right off the bat here.
Right. So we've gotten some ongoing public comment about the sideshows going on in this area. Is this a compact enough space to avoid those? We were sent at least one video that showed a very small car making very tight turns in this intersection. Is there any reinforcing to the center line on Key Route in this plan?
Reinforcement of the center line on Key Route, we don't have anything at the moment. Certainly could install these features called hardened center lines, which are it's like a rubber, no, it's plastic. It's a plastic type curb with the vertical posts sticking out.
Yeah. Gets nailed in or
Yeah,
epoxy?
I think in general, the smaller the intersection, the harder it is to do donuts, and so the larger footprint that you have now allows for a larger variety of vehicles to do
Sure.
burnouts.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Another question I had, and if we could switch back to the quick build view, to me, it almost seems like the crosswalk is pushed against the southbound Santa Fe travel lane, despite where the sort of the line of desire is shown by the breaks in the bulb outs. And to me, that the fast-moving traffic is on Santa Fe. There's no stop sign in that direction. Did you explore moving the crosswalk up a bit above the stop sign line?
We didn't look at that, but it's certainly something we could do. As a matter of shifting the striping, we could absolutely do that. I don't see any reason against doing that.
You know, I think if you look at the desire lines coming from the center area of Key Route and Santa Fe, they kind of converge a little higher. There's probably more foot traffic on Santa Fe, but I don't have any numbers behind that. I just wonder if moving that crosswalk a bit would help people feel safer crossing.
Well, let me clarify. Is your intention to move the crosswalk, say, by 40 or 50 feet so that you're at the narrow section of Key Route, or were you talking more like 5 to 10 feet to align?
I'm exploring. Well, Obviously, if you don't move it very far, it doesn't help a lot. But if you do move it very far, then it's out of the desire line. Yeah.
What about, there's a house there, and they need to get in and out of their.
Which corner?
I'm sorry, in the upper left, where you have a break in the green, there's a driveway there, and that person's going to need to get in and out. So if you move the crosswalk up too far, that would, you move it up a little or beyond that driveway, but not blocking that driveway, I would think.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking along the lines of what we have on Solano, where, the crosswalks are fairly wide, the view lines aren't good. It's assumed that you have to advance into the crosswalk after stopping so that you can see to turn.
Yeah.
And that may be true here as well, but you might be able to cheat that up. There's absolutely room to cheat it up a little bit, and I'm not sure how far that might be practical. I'm just throwing that out there. Other questions? Is there a practical reason for not including the crossing on Santa Fe in the quick build?
Curb wrap work.
Okay. And refuge, presumably.
And presumably the refuge
Okay.
if you were to construct it at the same time. Yes.
Okay. Great. Any further questions from the commission? Then we'll move it to public comment. And we have one on the floor. We have several. If you could form a line and take turns, we'll give you 3 minutes each. And if you have questions, we'll answer those at the end of the public comment period.
We go back to so this ties in with the comment that's going to be later also. Part of it's street parking. And so there's a house there that loses, for most Albany, I live in Albany and I work in Albany as a contractor, and we are always parking. I love crosswalks. I have a 10-year-old daughter. We walk to school, so I'm all about the
Is his mic on? I'm not hearing him very well. Yes, there we go.
I live here, I work here, I have a 10-year-old, we walk to school, so I'm all for having good crosswalks and good visibility, and I like the changes. But I'm really curious about a house that loses any parking in front of the house, and all of a sudden they're parking where and having to park across the street, walk across. So as we factor in this, and as we talk later on in the evening about another project, this is something that I think about as somebody who has vehicles, has work vehicles, and who rides bikes and walks in Albany.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Melody Reeves, and I live about 3 houses down from this intersection. I walk across it all the time. I walk my dog a lot to the Greenway, and I can't tell you how many times I've almost been hit. I think that the reason why the actual numbers are not there is that I have a whole process of making sure that I don't get hit. So I am very supportive of any improvement here. I think the quick build option is a really great idea to be able to kind of test out a concept and get something on the ground quickly. A couple things I would note in terms of deciding on kind of what materials to use in terms of whether it's paint or posts or things like that. Making sure that they're visible at night. That intersection is also very dark, and so something that's just maybe paint might not be visible enough in the dark. I also am very supportive of the crosswalk across Santa Fe Avenue. I think that would be really great. I understand that that might take a little bit more time, but there is a really large gap between marked crosswalks between Pomona and the Greenway. Yeah, those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Margarita Kloss, and I live on Key Route, 2 houses in.
Ma'am, if you could get a little closer to the mic. Thank you.
Let's see, so what's the process here? I mean, are you deciding what to do tonight? How long is there, what is the period for making comments on the schematic design?
We'll answer questions after the public comment period.
Okay. Let's see, so I think the 90-degree intersection will be a lot safer. I'm very eager to have it calm some of the traffic because people can speed down Key Route, particularly during rush hours. Crosswalks are greatly needed. I would also suggest that there would be a crosswalk from Key Route to Key Route, so if someone on the far side of Key Route needs to get over to the far side of Santa Fe, they'll have a direct line. Let's see. Glad to see that there aren't any new street lights that are planned because there's already a street light across the street, and we don't need any more light pollution. It looks like there's going to be far fewer parking spaces. I wonder if there's some way to design the curving intersection so that cars can park on both sides of it on Key Route, because I counted 11. There's going to be 11 less parking spaces, which is quite a bit. Those are all my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further comments from the room? How about comments online?
We have 2 hands raised. First is Jeremiah Pinguelo. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, so to me, I think the best solution is what you got going on there, with one addition, making it a 3-way stop. So that would mean putting up stop signs on the intersection for Santa Fe, because Santa Fe, there's no stop signs all the way from Marin to Dartmouth. You know, you're talking about sideshows, you know, with no stop signs there, that encourages cars just to really drive fast. So to make the intersection a whole lot safer, it would be nice to have a 3-way stop. My question is, maybe you can answer it when it's time for question and answers, is have you thought of making it a 3-way stop? You know, what are the pros and cons of putting stop signs on Santa Fe? So, I mean, if you're on Key Route and you're trying to merge on Santa Fe, cars are driving 25, 30, 35 miles an hour, maybe 40 miles an hour down Santa Fe, try to get to, you know, not Dartmouth, but Gilman, so that they can go down to Gilman and hit the freeway. It's kind of a thoroughfare to get to and from work, you know, because it meets with Gilman. So to make the intersection a whole lot safer, to make it safe for people walking their dogs, to cross the street, if you're proposing crosswalks to cross Santa Fe, I mean, to include a 3-way stop, it would bring all the cars to a halt. It would bring all the cars and all the traffic down to, you know, 0 miles an hour for a stop sign. And to me, that would just be the best addition to this project, is having it be a 3-way stop. I don't know what the commission thinks about it. I'm not sure what the residents around the area think about it. But I think the only way to really reduce speed, especially on Santa Fe, is to put a stop sign there. And that would make it to where you could cross Santa Fe safely. Because right now, I don't know how kids or people going, you know, to the Greenway can cross Santa Fe without having to sprint across the street, you know, playing, you know, the Frogger game with their life. So long story short is I really suggest a 3-way stop, putting up stop signs on Santa Fe. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Next is Dwayne Vogt. Please go ahead. Dwayne, please unmute.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Roberta, and I want to thank you for finally addressing this dangerous intersection. And I do like the concept number 2, just because of the crosswalks on Santa Fe, east to west, and then going from Santa Fe to Key Route. I know that there's a lot of traffic, and they're not usually going 25. So they're trying to get speed down to Gilman. And I just thankfully nothing has happened. There has been past incidents that have happened. And I'm glad this is finally being addressed, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have one.
No, they're shooting there too because they're.
We have one more hand raised. Maria Wilson, please go ahead. Oh, that hand just went down. Never mind. And it's back up. Okay. Should I go ahead? Maria Wilson, you should be able to talk now.
Sorry, I lowered my hand because I heard my name. I'm Maria Wilson. I'm a resident of Key Route and right along the block where this would happen. And I just want to say thank you to the commission for considering, this frankly very dangerous intersection. I think that there are problems on Santa Fe as well as Key Route. People, speed up and down Key Route, so north and south on Key Route, particularly around rush hour times, and in the turn into from Key Route into Santa Fe, I think sometimes that stop sign is looked at as a suggestion, and this is in addition to all the other problems that everyone who's spoken tonight have mentioned about Santa Fe, which I largely concur with. I wanted to say that Key Route is also a very narrow street. And so having this kind of speedway is really not, really efficient for that street either, or safe for that street either. And I'd also note on the idea that someone raised about, three-way stops or other mitigating measures, that Santa Fe actually does have a large number of speed bumps between Marin and down to, I guess that is Ramona or Pomona, but doesn't have one in that stretch where people are speeding into Albany or to get to Gilman Street. So that could be something that helps also. But long story short, I applaud the committee for trying to solve this issue. Happy for any solution. Really love Margarita's idea about also having a crosswalk across Key Route, because this is a very curious intersection that does seem to be abandoned in some ways. And I always wondered if it had to do with the end of Key Route on one end is Berkeley, and the other starts Albany. And so I thought it was a strange jurisdictional issue. So I applaud Albany for taking some actions here that could greatly improve, and either of the actions in my mind would greatly improve the safety. I share Margarita's concerns about the parking issue, but in my mind, safety outweighs, people, I guess, unfortunately having to move their car up the street a little bit. So thanks again, support any solution, but there have been some very good suggestions tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we actually have no other hands.
Any other commenters from the room? Actually, I think that was almost all the people who are here, so probably not. Let's bring it back to the commission for comments and taking up issues that were raised. I wanted to address the process issue that was raised, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is sort of an initial look at this intersection and a public hearing to get feedback from the public and the commissioners. Staff will then take that back and, depending on what we recommend, either abandon it or come back with some plan to address issues that were brought up this evening. And just to be clear, this body doesn't have its own budget. We make recommendations to the City Council for priorities and designs.
That's correct. We're taking a look at the design to inform work that is happening in the near term, sidewalk repair, but we're also, if we have design direction, be looking to make a project. And so the process that continues would be dictated by how we put together a process for delivering this, whether we do a striping and look to where we would include this in a future striping project, or we would be probably needing to fundraise for the longer term curb change, a more expensive project. But there's, capital improvement planning work that would inform how we go about seeking funding for something like that.
And just to be clear, the near-term work you're talking about is curb cut improvements. And this will help inform the alignment of those.
Yeah, the next agenda item will discuss this, but there's sidewalk repair work that's substantial enough at one edge of this intersection that is going to trigger repair of or reconstruction of a curb ramp. So we're wanting to think about where we put the curb ramp, or if we change its orientation in alignment with anticipated future changes to the intersection.
Great. Commissioners.
Well, and I generally like the plan. I don't see how we're losing 11 spots. It looks like we're losing more on Santa Fe. I don't know what the standards are, but I wish there was a consistent way to quantify how many parking spots get lost. I guess my main concern is, can we get the map back up there?
The quick build or the hard build?
Quick build, yeah. Either one, I think. That's good. We're just losing, in those yellowish green areas, we're losing a lot of space. I mean, part of me goes, wow, maybe you could put an ADU in there, but in a town like this where it's so cramped, we ought to think about how we could really maximize the value of that space, and just, planters, something, because space is really valuable in this town. And mini parks, I have no grand suggestions, but there's a lot of square footage there. That's my thought.
In general, we take one public comment period. If there's some new idea that we bring up, like ADUs in the street, I would have to allow public comment on that particular issue. But in general, you get one shot unless there's a real extreme issue. That doesn't mean that you can't talk to us offline through email or contact us otherwise, and Justin Freed is available as staff to talk with you as well. We're not making any final decisions here tonight.
So I'll chime in. I think that, rather than just do big swath of concrete as a final design, I'd love to see planting areas, maybe bioswales, depending on the water flow coming into the area.
Did you say water feature?
Water flow.
Okay.
So if the curb line is flowing away from the intersection, there's not much you can do to feed water into it. But if water is flowing towards the intersection, you put an opening in the curb, the water will then flow into that area, and you can sort of do some biofiltration before it goes to the storm drain. If we had more permeable soils, it would actually just percolate in, but we have clay, so probably not. That's future design. That's not really what we're looking at tonight. That's, putting the finishing touches on there at some point, hopefully. I do appreciate, Andrew, what you've done in looking at kind of preserving what parking we can, and the concept that even in the quick build, we could leave some space that people can pull into. Obviously, you and staff will think about how people get to those spaces so that it's kind of rational and safe, and how much of that can be built into the permanent design in some appropriate manner. Definitely happy to save every space that doesn't have to go away. where we put the crosswalk across Santa Fe because I think that's a good idea. Just the physical space of the crosswalk is going to be, 15 feet wide or so. There goes a parking space on either side, a parking space leading up to the crosswalk, unless it's right next to a driveway, which would be good fortune. So I don't like to lose parking spaces, but when we're doing it to make things safer and better, it's probably something that we need to not be totally averse to. Our policy on daylighting intersections would theoretically already take away a few of the parking spaces at this intersection for safety. So it's how many on top of that are we taking away? And it's fine to get some numbers so that we can just be clear with people. Here's what exists today, and in future what maybe it might be. And because it's safety or it's meeting the existing policy, that's why we would make those changes. As I mentioned, I do like the idea of the quick build as a trial. It will allow us to test out a lot of things. If the sidewalk project can do the crosswalk, I feel like the crosswalk is almost independent, the crosswalk across Santa Fe, relatively independent of the rest of what happens at the intersection, and probably worth doing regardless. So if it's kind of a do it now or we got to come back sometime in the future, let's get the curb ramps in for that crosswalk, assuming that we feel comfortable that that's the place for it. And then the quick build can test out the rest of the crosswalks, perhaps. Those are kind of my thoughts.
Before I make my comments, I didn't hear either of you comment on the idea of making this a three-way stop.
I will chime in briefly on that. I think one of the things I heard was people already using Key Route a lot, and it's a narrow street, and interrupting the traffic flow on Santa Fe would make it that much easier to use Key Route, to put more traffic on Key Route, which I don't think is desirable. The relative traffic volumes, I don't know whether it has been specifically evaluated. Might be something we could take a look at just with some spot observations to get a sense of order of magnitude. If they're particularly imbalanced, a three-way stop leads to people thinking, there's hardly ever any traffic on the cross street. Why am I on this main street stopping for no good reason? And maybe I don't really need to stop. And they just get worse and worse at obeying the stop sign. So the unintended consequence of a stop sign that the public views as unnecessary can be adverse. So my kind of tendency is be really careful about making changes like that without really looking at the numbers and the implications of what it might do.
I just had an assumption that there are some engineering criteria for how many stop signs you want to put along a main arterial, as opposed to perhaps another speed pillow. What do we call them now? Is there a new term for them?
Speed humps or speed tables.
Speed tables, that's the one. So if they're, I'm not aware of these kind of technical considerations, but I agree that, there's two up by the school, I think. And then I think maybe having another speed table might be an option. But Fareed, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it makes much more sense to have another speed table than a stop sign that may, again, for the reasons that you mentioned, traffic engineers do have criteria for where to put stop signs, and traffic volumes are part of them. I kind of alluded to that, but I think that Andrew is well aware of how to do stop sign warrant analysis. I don't know that we have to go full bore, but you can take a look at just are the indicators that it's likely to be met, and if the answer is no, then it's not really worth spending a lot of time and money on. It should be pretty easy to get a sense of which side that's going to land on.
Thanks for exploring that. I tend to agree with your reasoning, and I would note that there's a greenway crossing very close to this intersection, and I would not want to have another reason for people to blow through that. So having said that, I think a crosswalk on Santa Fe is a potentially practical crossing, and maybe that's a speed table crosswalk in the long term. In general, I'm in favor of the speed build. Thank you for iterating to save some parking between what we saw on our materials and what you presented tonight. So we're definitely keeping in mind saving the parking, and the details need to be worked out about that. You're going to make the crosswalk double 4, right? Yeah, okay. It just came up earlier. But I think if we can get that crosswalk a few feet away from the stream of traffic, or a few feet further away from the stream of traffic, and tweak the details, check in with the fire department if you haven't yet on this design. I'm seeing some good progress towards making this a lot more comprehensible intersection and safer. We heard on both ends of the lighting spectrum about it being already too light and not light enough, but perhaps I would interpret that as maybe if we're putting in bollards, they're not dark green, as we have in some other areas of the city, which still work, but and I think that's pretty much what I have. So at this point, I think we need a motion to recommend that staff incorporate the comments and the current plans and move forward.
Okay, so I move that the commission recommend to the staff that the conceptual plan for Santa Fe and Key Route be incorporated into future projects. Does that do it?
I will second that with the friendly suggestion that we add to that incorporating comments from the commission to the extent feasible.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll vote.
Commissioner Barnes?
Yes.
Commissioner Javanda?
Aye.
Commissioner McCroskey?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. Thank you all for your comments and participating in the process. And we'll invite Chair Chomsky back to the room, I believe.
I'm not going to unpack too much of my stuff because I have a feeling I'm headed for the door again pretty soon.
I may be first.
Oh, okay.
So I'll just tee it up since I'm more familiar with the recusal side of this. So we've restructured. If you saw early version of the presentation, he just reoriented for conflict of interest purposes. We'll start with the overview and the one location that there are no conflicts, so you guys can all consider that, discuss that, and then the others will take in series. The first one after that will be this location that we just discussed, so that'll be Harry's conflict of interest. The next one after that will be Ken's, and then the final one will be Michael.
Okay. And just to be clear, this is item 5-3, sidewalk, no, yes, 5-3, sidewalk repair program.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm here to talk about some preliminary concepts and designs for Phase 8 of the Sidewalk Repair Program. So as Justin just mentioned, we did repost these slides on Tuesday, and it was mostly just because we had to rearrange the presentation. So we'll start first with some preliminary concepts for 2 Phase 8 locations. This is related to curb ramp upgrades, and then we'll move on to holistic repair locations. We briefly talked about this in January, and as promised, we're back to talk some more. So first, 1612 Solano, and for reference, this is at Solano and Ventura. We have a location at the southwest corner here, next to the AT&T building, if you're familiar. This is one of our critical repair locations. The amount of work we need to do, specifically because there's a lot of poor conforms, so we had to extend this repair footprint a lot further down Solano than immediately needed attention. And since we're doing so much work, this requires us to bring the adjacent curb ramp up to code. Now, I want to talk a little bit of context with this particular location before we get into it some more. Again, this is that southwest corner at Solano and Ventura. There is, per 2018 Solano Avenue Complete Streets, there is a conceptual design for this corridor and this intersection, specifically to this corner. We don't really want, this program, it's the Sidewalk Repair Program, so we're really focusing on that one corner. And, we have limited funding for a large-scale project like this, even if we were to pull it from some of the paving funds, which might be appropriate. This hasn't been budgeted for. And doing this kind of as a spot improvement rather than a corridor-wide improvement, it's going to be an ineffective use of our costs. Doing it as a corridor-wide treatment would be much more efficient. But those 2 points aside, I want to really focus that this is a conceptual design. And it being conceptual design, it's very difficult to actually construct, especially because it's subject to change. It's been 5 years since, Solano Avenue Complete Streets has been talked about. So kind of to talk about some of the difficulties if, theoretically it was pushed to do this as a spot improvement, we have a lot of issues with effectively constructing a few things. I think number one is drainage. So based on the conceptual design, it looks like drainage is, flows between the travel lanes and the parking aisle. That's not how the street is currently designed. It flows to the curb. So if we were to build this bulb out, bulb outs always affect drainage. We don't even have a proper plan of how to construct it to work with drainage now and in the future at the same time. There's also difficulty with crosswalk alignments and curb ramp alignments. This is designed to be constructed together, so it's very easy to make sure that these curb ramps are aligning, the crosswalks are going across at as much as a 90-degree as we could. And if we were to just do one side, it would probably complicate construction in the future. And this being conceptual design, there has been some back and forth, I believe, about whether Solano will be pull-in parking or back-in parking. Constructing as it is now is solidifying at least this block as pull-in parking. And lastly, the median island, this is kind of, again, with the alignment of the curb ramp and crosswalk. Without knowing the full width of the bulb out across the street, we really wouldn't be able to place this median properly for future design. So with that in mind, we have this critical repair, and what we're saying is we want to conduct this critical repair. We were going to upgrade this curb ramp in place because it is required by law. It would be a type A curb ramp, right up to code, with the notion that in the future, when we are doing the Solano Avenue Complete Streets corridor, this intersection will get reworked. It will have those 2 directional curb ramps most likely, or however is finally decided. Because if we don't do this way, we won't be able to do this critical repair until we, do the Complete Streets project, which is years into the future. And we're now acknowledging that there's a hazard here and we're failing to act, so we have liability if there was some kind of unfortunate incident here, a trip and fall, for example. There's ways to mitigate that risk, such as following state law where we would notice the adjacent property owner who is technically responsible for the sidewalks. In this case, it's AT&T. But if we were to go that route, they would fix the sidewalk and then do the exact same work where they would upgrade it in place. And if they weren't to do it in a timely fashion by state law, we would do it and we would recommend in place, just as it is now. So ultimately, our recommendation is to get this critical repair done in Phase 8 later this year, is to upgrade in place the Type A diagonal ramp with the context that long-term, we will rework this intersection as what is decided with the Solano Avenue Complete Streets design. And as they, since there is going to be recusals, we're going to work through this, and this will be the first action of the night. So I'll stop here for questions.
Do we have any questions from commissioners?
Just one. If we replace the curb ramp where it is with the upgrade, would it include any striping markings to sort of incorporate a path of travel to the crosswalk? Kind of like the little diagonal stripe next to it leading into the crosswalks? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure, but what you're referring to, but we wouldn't really be touching the street because we'd have to grind down any striping on these crosswalks, and this is just a sidewalk, project.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Yeah, I'm curious about why the single width or the basic width curb cut has been chosen instead of a slightly wider circumference of curb cut. And I'm curious if the tree planting box cement is going to be replaced or not.
So the planter box, we're going to work that in somehow. We can't repair the sidewalk and then put it flush to a broken piece of concrete. So yes, we will be working that. We might have to adjust slightly the part that I think has a volunteer tree in it right now, because I don't think we have that full 4 feet we need for the landing. But it won't affect the fully grown tree there. But yes, so we will repair that. As for changing the curb ramp, I'm thinking you're referring to maybe a modified C or something like that. Or
I'm not allowed to express an opinion at this time.
the main reason is if we're trying to create different types of curb ramps or unique designs here, or per different standards, we are starting to get into that point where we're reworking how this works. And technically, if we were to widen the curb ramp more than, like, for example, a modified C, we're going to have issues with that landing because it's now getting into the tree. So for us to do this efficiently, to get that critical repair fix, we just need to go in with a Type A, which is the most straightforward constructability design.
Thanks, that's clear.
So can you explain a little bit about what Type A means, and also in what sense is this an upgrade? Like how is the design shown here different from what's on the ground today?
So a Type A is here, physically it functions very much the same. The things that don't have, it's not decoded, is I don't believe we have the width of a landing. The flare slopes may not be compliant right now, but the biggest one is detectable warning surfaces and potentially even the counter slope as well, which is kind of where the crosswalk meets the gutter. You need to have it at a certain slope, otherwise you get, wheelchair casters get stuck or they tip over. So what it would look like, physically it would look pretty similar to what it is now, but it would have a detectable warning surface, and we'd make sure all the slopes and landing spaces are compliant, which is kind of what I went into, where we may need to take a little bit of concrete out from that planter to make sure we have that. I believe it's 4 foot 2 inch minimum we have per our standard.
Okay, can you just give a little context about what Type A means? Like, what are the types, and how does Type A fit into Albany's grand plan?
This is a type A, it's this type of curb ramp. The different types of ramps are just, what kind of warning surfaces are used, the width of the landing, how it's flared. For example, a type F is similar to this, but instead you have retaining curbs along the ramp. We have several standards, and Caltrans has standards similar that have these. This is just what they're called in the engineering world. And type A is just your very standard curb ramp.
Okay, and that's part of Albany's grand plan for curb ramps, or is that, because the presentation is leaving us with the impression that this is somehow a substandard, or not the kind of design that we would ordinarily choose, and I'm just trying to understand.
It's not the type of curb ramp, it's the preference of how we design. Corners, we typically do 2-directional curb ramps at a corner. That's the city preference in the path of travel. But to do that, we talked through those complications. It won't work here without a redesign.
Okay, so the compromise is to leave it with 1 diagonal ramp instead of replacing it with 2 directional ramps, which would normally be the preference.
Yes.
Citywide. Okay, thanks for explaining that. Another question?
Yes, can you go back up to the photo? I think it's up 1 or 2 slides. Keep going. Keep going. Was a photograph looking, yeah, that one. So that's looking southbound on Ventura, and just off to the diagonal to the right is the AT&T building, correct?
Yeah, that right there is, you can kind of see it as the AT&T.
So can you just walk me through, it's more or less going to look like this, so what we're going to have is the width of and the slope of the ramp going to change? Is it going to get a little bigger, a little flatter? Is that tree? If I was in a chair, I'd think, that corner sticking out there on the planter would be bothersome.
So that particular piece of the planner there is what I'm talking about, is we may have to readjust it to make sure we fit in a level landing when we get to the top of the ramp. What you'll see too a little bit is, there'll be more pronounced flares per our standard spec and per code, and then we'd have a detectable warning surface.
The yellow bump.
Yeah, for those unfamiliar, detectable warning surface is basically that yellow circular bumpy surface at the end of a curb ramp.
Yellow circular bumpy, that's a term of art, right?
Okay.
Yeah, it would be in that bumpy asphalt in the back, you'd clean that up and get rid of that.
Yeah, so that is the issue that we need to fix, and just doing all the work around here is what triggers bringing this ramp up to code per law.
Any other commission questions? Okay, let's move on to public comment. Would anybody in the room like to comment on this item? Would anybody online like to comment on this item?
I'm not seeing any hand raise online. Never mind. Just got one. Jeremiah Pinguelo, please go ahead.
My only question is, why is it yellow circle bumpies instead of blue? I mean, it's ADA, and I think the universal color for ADA is blue, right? So I'm just wondering why it's yellow. I thought yellow had to do with schools or something. I'm just wondering where the color, choice of color came in, because I don't know, I just think it should be blue if it's an ADA ramp. I like the bumpy things because also that helps out with blind people, so they're able to tell where the sidewalk ends and street starts, because they could feel the bumps with their walking cane. So that's one advantage of the circle bumpy things, is it really does help blind people get around. So yeah, so I was just wondering, why isn't it blue? That's pretty much my only question. And also, I've noticed those plastic bumpy things actually sometimes they come up and they separate from the surface underneath, just like the one over on San Pablo, Goodwill. couple months ago, that whole yellow thing was just floating on top, and people were just kind of kicking it around, and it was loose. So I was just wondering, what's the longevity of the bumpies, the circles? How well is that to the ground? I mean, is it bolted in, or is it glued in? Or what's the process of those things? And then how come it's not blue?
Thank you for your comment. Are there any simple answers to some of those questions?
Yellow is the state Caltrans specification. They say to use yellow. By ADA code, it just needs to be detectably visible from a gray concrete. And these are typically cast in place. I can't speak to the one on San Pablo without observing it. You are allowed to, in the simplest way, put them on like a sticker, some of them are, but we typically, Albany, we cast them in place, where when the concrete's setting, we put the whole form, the whole mold into the concrete.
Okay, well, let's bring it back to the commission for discussion.
This seems like a reasonable compromise to me. I'd love to see the planter edges rounded to some extent, because people will be trying to circumnavigate it.
I agree.
I think that as a temporary, certainly makes sense. Even if we didn't change the corner configuration in the long term, I'd probably have a slightly different pairing of a Type 8 across Ventura and a Type G, with just cutting off that sort of L of the planter area. And you've probably already looked at that, and it's 2 ramps, and it's rebuilding all the concrete, so it's much more than I think what you've asked us to contemplate here. So this makes sense. Perhaps Public Works could do a little striping project that creates a diagonal walkway parallel to the curb, 4 feet away from the curb. Basically, just if you put a white stripe 4 feet from the curb that goes from the crosswalk on Solano to the crosswalk on Ventura, that designates a piece of diagonal crosswalk that links those two up from the bottom of the ramp. And I think with that, it would meet all the kind of basic minimal traffic engineering criteria that you'd want, along with the basic ADA target that we're shooting for here. And I think it's a good quick fix.
I agree. I think it's a good fix. I think we've all spoken in favor of option 1. Would somebody like to make a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor, roll call.
So is that option 1 with striping recommendation?
Yeah, just a little additional striping.
Planter curving.
Which may not be by the sidewalk project. It would be a recommendation for Public Works to incorporate if and when there's additional striping being done in the city.
Okay, is the motion clear, or would you like to be restated? Clear, okay. Can you do a roll call for us?
I'm happy to do a roll call. Commissioner Barnes?
Yes.
Commissioner Javendal?
Aye.
Commissioner McCroskey?
Aye.
Chair Chomsky?
Yes. Okay,
Motion carries.
So we're going to go on to number 2. I'm going to recuse.
Commissioner Barnes, would you like to take this portion of the meeting?
Sure. All right, this is 1134 Santa Fe. We've already seen this before, yes? So what's,
I'm going to go through this one pretty quickly, but for the most part, it's a similar situation. There's a critical repair that needs to be done under the sidewalk repair. We're doing a larger repair to address a lot of poor conforms and issues, and it's adjacent to a curb ramp, a non-compliant curb ramp. So this repair ultimately will trigger the need to bring the curb ramp up to code. You already went through this, the context around here with the calming. This was basically accelerated at this intersection because we needed to figure out how to lay out the curb ramp. So what we're recommending is we repair the curb ramp in place during phase 8, and then any kind of long-term rework will be done as determined. So this would be a type F curb ramp. The details there, what that means is a ramp with retaining curbs on the side to kind of keep it straight in line. And to be clear, these retaining curbs will be outside the path of travel when it does meet the sidewalk. They will not, we will make sure they are not a tripping hazard. And this ramp will ultimately align with the quick build improvements that were recommended earlier. Similar situation, if we don't do this, we have interim liability, and it wouldn't get repaired until a paving project. A full-on paving project, not a maintenance-style paving project. So with that, unless there's more context needed, we are recommending to upgrade that curb ramp in place with the type F, so that we can get the critical repair done.
Okay, any questions?
No.
Questions from anyone in the audience? Question?
My name's Margarita Kloss. So did you
I'm sorry, I'm a little hard of hearing. Could you
Tilt
step?
the microphone up?
Yeah.
So you speak into it. There, thank you.
Sorry, Michael.
My name's Margarita Kloss, and I live 2 houses in. Did you just say that the curb ramp is going to be not where the sidewalk goes? Is that what you just said?
It is kind of, as you see now, it'll follow the Santa Fe path. It's directional in the Santa Fe travel.
Okay, and those side curbs aren't going to be a trip hazard for people walking on the sidewalk?
No, they will ultimately come up and either be flush with the sidewalk, or we'll have them in a way that they're not aligned with the path of travel. We do not want to put retaining curbs within the path of travel because we don't want the tripping hazard.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone online?
Don't see any hand raised online.
Okay. Final comments?
I like option 1. I would at least like the alignment of a cross Santa Fe crosswalk explored to make sure that it's not built out of, how should I say that? You know what I mean?
Right, so if we're going to put a crosswalk across Santa Fe, you just want to make sure that this is independent of that crosswalk.
It doesn't block any future crosswalk
Right,
across
doesn't
Santa Fe.
preclude.
Thank you,
Yeah.
preclude.
Okay. But just for clarification, the sidewalk or the crosswalk we're considering for Santa Fe is a little further down.
Right.
So it should be independent. I think that wraps up this one. Do we have a motion? Do we need a motion on this one, Justin?
I'll move that we recommend option 1.
I will second that.
Okay, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Commissioner Burns?
Yes.
Commissioner Javendal?
Aye.
Commissioner McCroskey?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next item. Gain one, lose one. Now, who's leaving for this one?
So before there's any recusals right now, just to go over generally, the next 2 are related for holistic repair locations. This is where, as I've talked to some of the commissioners that were here in January, street trees have caused damage beyond just the sidewalk. So while we have a contractor out there, we want to coordinate repair of all these hazards, which might be the street, the curb, the gutter, and the sidewalk. And, the repairs beyond the sidewalk, that would use other funding, paving funding sources, or et cetera, not the Measure P1 funding. And this was specifically for 1501 Washington and 602 Santa Fe. These were conditionally approved for sidewalk repairs in January as part of Phase 7. But we did decide, just to avoid delays on the Phase 7 deliveries, since these are a bit more complicated, we pushed these into Phase 8. And as per the recommendation at the January meeting, we were to come back to talk about curb ramp layout and red curb markings. And with that, we'll first go into 1501 Washington.
Before we do that, what is the end time of the meeting, at which time we would need to extend it? Is that 9:30?
Yes.
Yeah, time check.
Can we have a motion to extend?
So moved.
To extend
Could you give a
till-
time?
Oh, yeah, till 10 o'clock?
I'll second that.
I think you could do a voice vote.
And voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. And now for which address are we
Excuse
covering
me.
now?
Washington, 1501
1501
Washington.
Washington, okay.
The church.
So as was discussed back in January, there was 2 liquid ambers in front of 1501 Washington. And so first context, if you're familiar, this is St. Albans Episcopal Church on the Washington side. Those 2 liquid ambers have done a lot of damage to the sidewalk, the curb, and the road. So as a holistic repair, we're looking to fix all that. So while the sidewalk repair actually doesn't trigger the curb ramp to bring a curb ramp up to code, the combination of all this work basically surrounding the curb ramp does. So per city direction, we wanted 2 directional curb ramps to be installed. To get these to fit, we do need to put in a bulb out along Washington, and the bulb out extends kind of where our red curb policy already is, which is 20 feet on approach. The bulb out will have some, expand the landscaping strip, larger tree well basin. There is a application to remove the 4 trees in front of St. Albans. That doesn't affect the layout ultimately, that was going to be discussed tonight, but just wanted to bring that up, and that's at the June pros meeting that will be decided.
I'm sorry, just for somebody has applied to Parks and Rec to remove those trees?
Yes, this was not a city application. This is a adjacent property owner application. So let me see if I can bring up a highlighter. There's 2 directional curb ramps that are in line with the path of travel per city direction, and to get these to fit without having these flares, issue with these flares meeting and having a potential tripping hazard or a low spot that might cause some ponding in the ramps, we needed to space these out more, which is why we have the bulb out in design. To get, for safety improvements, since we're doing all this curb ramp, one of the things we do is, per city policy, is daylight the intersections. So that is a 20-foot red curb on approach, which would be this Washington, and then a 10-foot on departure, which would be on Curtis. As part of these, there's currently a storm drain in place here, to get this all to work. We're relocating and placing a new inlet on Curtis and a new inlet along Washington. The Washington one in particular is very important because otherwise we'd have significant ponding since we are bulbing out the curb. And similarly here, the Curtis one will intercept water coming from the north to make sure it's not flooding ramps. With that in mind, we do put some red curb about 2 feet beyond the curb ramps, the storm drains, to make sure people aren't blocking or parking in front of them. Now keep this in mind, this is a draft design, it's our 90%. We're very confident that we can actually move the storm drains, nudge them back into that 20 feet and 10 feet respectively. It's something we're in talks with the designer, but in case we can't do that, that's why we're asking up to 24 feet on Washington and up to 13 feet on Curtis. Again, we are confident that we can nudge that to stay within city policy of 20 feet and 10 feet. So with that, we're ultimately asking, we are recommending the 2 directional curb ramps. That's a type A along Curtis and a type G with a retaining curb crossing Washington with the bulb out. And then the red curb, 13 feet and 24 feet, that we do plan to bring down to 10 feet, 20 feet respectively, as long as there's no storm drain relocation issues, which again, we're pretty confident that we can get that within.
Okay.
Okay, questions from the commission?
Yeah, are you going to do any more red curbing? I thought in one of these drawings I saw some more red curbs.
So there is red curbing for 1501 Washington, and then the next item, there's red curbing for 602 Santa Fe.
No, I mean, are you going to do the other side of Curtis Street? So if you're southbound on Curtis, are you going to red curb that part of the intersection as part of this?
This is just for the sidewalk, related to the sidewalk program, the curb ramp upgrades, we're staying completely within the work extent for this project.
You're just doing the northeast corner and that's it? No modifications to the other three corners?
Not on this project, no.
I guess my only question is the type C ramp crossing Curtis. It looks like the slope part of the ramp is pretty short, so there's not much of a grade to cover there, I take it. Between the landing area and where the truncated domes start, looks like a really short ramp segment, so my assumption is that the grade differential is very small.
I believe so. I'd have to double check the grading plans we have.
And if that's the way it's been drawn up, I'm pretty confident that's what it is. And I'm seeing some nodding back there, so
Yeah.
I'll take that as good.
I can jump in just briefly. James doesn't. I've been doing a lot more curb ramps recently, so I've been doing a lot more curb ramps recently, so maybe I can explain. A part of this holistic repair is also that the sidewalk has heaved significantly, and there's a very high crown on Curtis. And so we're actually taking advantage of this project to do less streetscape work at a later time.
That makes very good sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? Any public comment on this item?
Good evening. My name is Pixie Hayward Shickley, and I've lived in Albany at the corner of Washington and Curtis for 48 years. I'm speaking for myself and for many people in the neighborhood who are against this plan for removing parking and adding red curbs on both Washington and Curtis. And they couldn't attend tonight, so I'm here, although another one of my neighbors is also here. Eliminating parking spaces will not improve safety in our neighborhood. The church at 1501 Washington Avenue is a very busy place with religious services and a preschool that operates all day, 5 days a week. The church is also used as a meeting place for community groups, as a venue for music and lectures, and for produce delivery and pickup. There are many elderly people who attend church services, weddings, funerals, and other events held at the church. Parking is at a premium in the neighborhood, and eliminating close-in spots will adversely affect us all, but particularly the elderly. The preschool has lived up to their promise of having their employees and clients park on the church side of both streets, which has helped our parking issues. But eliminating parking spots will impact them and adversely impact the entire neighborhood. The sidewalk needs repairing because of the damage caused by the liquid amber trees. Reconfiguring the whole corner is a bad idea. Moving the drains, according to the plan that I have seen, is also very problematic, as there are sump pump outlets below where the new drains will be placed, with no place for the water to go, and a new red curb for the new drain up on Curtis will remove another parking space. Our neighborhood works diligently to keep the drains clean of leaves and debris to avoid flooding, although during some of the big storms, Curtis sometimes floods. I respectfully urge the Transportation Commission to reject this plan and look at other ideas that would keep the parking spaces and provide safe access for the elderly and the very young. No red curbs, please. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Anybody else in the room? Okay.
Thank you again. I'm Lauren Moore. I live across the street at 1502 Washington Avenue. I've also worked a lot with St. Albans, and I'm working with them to get an ADA ramp built for access for the church. This past weekend, there was a catering van double parked in front of my car in the middle of the street for about 4 hours. There were also 2 parents double parked on the St. Albans side of the street for 20, 30 minutes waiting for somebody to come out. This was on a weekend. I didn't make any comments, didn't knock on anybody's windows because they're trying to accommodate events and what are happening at the church. But eliminating a parking space and the curb bump out, I think, is really not beneficial to any of us. The sump pump that Dixie mentioned actually catches not just the sump in the basement church, but also roof rainwater that comes off the building. It gets put into lines and comes out on that side of the street as well. So it's not just sump pump water, but roof drain water. So quite a bit of water can come out of that line. I hadn't thought about it until she mentioned it. So it doesn't really help us in the immediate neighborhood, and I'm not taking into account, I've until tonight hadn't heard about red lighting or daylighting intersections. I'm also, as a contractor, working on a house at 801 Carmel, and now with the new red intersection where that just all got rebuilt around the holidays, there's no longer 2 parking spots there in front of the house. There's sort of 1.5. So I'm not, the red curbs are a new thing to us in the neighborhood, and I drive and walk with my child in the neighborhood every day. We just take great pains not to get hit by cars because they drive up and down our street just as fast as they do anywhere else. So I also don't care for the plan, and have talked to a couple of my neighbors as well who agree with me. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment in the room? I don't think so. Any public comment online?
No hands raised.
Okay. I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion.
So I just want to clarify, the only reason we're doing the bulb out is to create space between the 2 curb cuts. Is that correct?
That's the technical reason behind it, but we're also, if we're doing the 20 feet of red curb per policy to make sure we're daylighting our intersections for safety improvements, we found this as a boon because we can basically also improve visibility and make sure this is a crossing for all ages and abilities to use.
And it's not now.
As of right now, this is a larger crossing. Washington's, most of our, compared to our north-south street, our west-east streets are larger to cross. If you're parked up against it, it's difficult to cross. Daylighting intersections is a common thing done around the country and recommended by many transit officials to do, and it's a city policy as well established for safety improvements.
Yeah, I know we've been, trying to daylight intersections for many years now. So in general, for a curb, is it 20 feet and 10 feet? Are those the standards for red curbs?
20 feet on approach and 10 feet on departure per our policy. Cities vary between 20 to 30 feet on approach.
Okay, well, I will just say, based on personal experience, because I live 2 blocks further up, and when I go down Curtis Street, same street, and there's Portland is cross street.
Michael, can you stay close to the mic, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. In Portland, so I go southbound on Curtis, approaching Thousand Oaks. It's a hill coming down from Calusa. And there's a big vehicle that always parks right at that corner. And it's really pretty dangerous because if you don't have a good sight line to the left, you have to pull all the way out into Thousand Oaks, and there's cars going down that street very fast. So we have often thought of either clandestinely towing that vehicle away or getting it red curbed. I think there are really, serious safety benefits from red curbs and in situations like that where you have to pull out around vehicles blocking your view and pray that you saw or didn't see the car coming at you. So, if they wanted to do this on Thousand Oaks, 2 blocks further north, me personally, I think I'd approve of it. The 10 feet, it also helps as you turn, in this case, if you were coming westbound on Washington and turning to the right. Although it's not so critical here, but it's nice if you don't have to try to work your way around the car parked right there at the curb. It gives you can make a smoother turn, especially if there's a car coming down the street and you want to go. So, I know it's a problem losing the parking. Do we have liability concerns if we don't fix this like we do on Solano?
I'm not qualified to speak about liability unless, Allison, you have anything to chime in.
I don't know enough about where the liability begins and ends. I will add, we would need to revisit city policy that has been approved by council regarding this if we wanted to deviate from the lengths that are prescribed there. There is some variations allowed, but it requires some engineering study, and that's primarily at locations where there's real topographic concerns, where generally speaking, you're actually extending the red curb in those situations where you have topographic kind of vertical changes. You're actually extending red curb often, or locations where you have very unusual configurations of intersections. Again, in those situations, you're often extending, like we saw earlier tonight in some of the other presentations around Santa Fe. There's some longer areas of red curb.
So to maintain the status quo, really, we would have to go up to the council and get the council to do some sort of exemption from city codes that mandate this pattern of red striping everywhere else.
Correct, and I think Fareed I can't remember if it was Fareed or James, might have spoken to the fact that this is somewhat of a kind of industry is not the right term, but cities are moving towards this if they haven't already implemented it more broadly. Albany is not on the forefront of doing red curbing.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just chime in on that essentially the city policy is that all intersections everywhere in the city should have 20 feet of red curb on the approach, 10 feet on the departure, and it's only a matter of when do we implement it. And so in the same way that we upgrade the ADA ramps when we touch the intersection, which is why we're having this conversation, we should also, to follow our policy, do the daylighting. So it's, totally understood that it's inconvenient. It creates parking issues in many places, but the city's policy as adopted is that the safety benefit to pedestrians and to people in vehicles, as you described, both of those outweigh the inconvenience.
It's not just about the inconvenience, it's literally about having 2 cars double parked on both sides of the street and people still driving up and down the street. I have a kid, 10 years old, and my neighbor has a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old who live across the street. People go through that,
These comments are out of order, and you've made your point. Thank you. Yeah. Well. Yeah. Okay.
We understand that people do many illegal things, driving around the streets, parking in bad places, in front of fire hydrants, you name it. But the goal, I'm explaining why the city adopted the policy. The policy is the way it is for the interest of safety. We know that once upon a time, the city of Albany had a policy of no parking on street overnight. So on-street parking was a daytime privilege, and state law, in fact, until just a few years ago, already assumed no parking within 20 feet of an intersection. Cities didn't have to paint red. It was assumed state law. You could be cited for doing it. And people just became ignorant of it and began doing it and assumed it was permitted. So cities have had to implement daylighting of intersections to go back to the safety policy that always existed under state law and put this in place. So there may be many things where then because of that, people do other bad behaviors. And I totally get it. Double parking is not a good thing. And people do it for many reasons. So that's understood. And maybe there has to be some additional way of dealing with those. But the basic premise of the policy, I understand. So I think, again, unless we want to go back to council and say, here's an overriding consideration why this intersection has to have parking up to the crosswalk, in which case I would say that bulb out better come out past the parking space, right? So the only case where a parking space up to the crosswalk is going to pass a traffic engineer's judgment for safety is if you bring the crosswalk out farther than the parked car. So the pedestrian is visible before they step into the street. That solves the pedestrian problem. It doesn't solve the traffic problem that you mentioned. So it's all trade-offs. I get it, but I think this meets the city policy in general.
And I will say, I often go for an afternoon jog from my house, and I very cautiously approach that intersection, kind of hunker down behind the car, and peek out to make sure there's no car coming. So, because they really bomb down Thousand Oaks pretty quickly. Is there any possibility, is there no drop-off parking or possibility of, at the church to have a drop-off parking spot? I'm sorry,
this isn't,
that was a question for
this is a
Justin.
question for
I'm sorry, I was
staff, I
looking back
think.
to you.
I mean, other curb designations adjacent to the school could be considered by the commission and agendized at a future point.
White zones and so forth. I'd be happy to put that on a future agenda to figure out the parking management around the church. But I think that's really independent of the sidewalk project.
Do you have a sense of how many parking spaces are being lost in this design compared to the status quo today?
You'd roughly lose spots for 2 cars, one on Washington, one on Curtis.
One on Curtis. Okay, I walked through the intersection earlier today, and I think there are, there's a curb along the north side of Washington with, I thought, maybe 5 parking spaces in a row, and we'd maybe be losing 1 or 2 of those. And along Curtis, there's also maybe 5 or 6 in a row. I was a little hard to count, and that's just the ones that are directly adjacent to the corner. There are many other parking spaces along the block of Washington and the block of Curtis that we're considering if you consider both sides of the street. So I think the percentage of parking in this very small area that we're thinking about removing is a very small percentage. I don't think it's going to have a huge effect on how much double parking people need to do. If we leave these parking spaces as they are, they will tend to be the first ones that get filled if they're the most popular ones. So they're going to be full anyway. If we were talking about taking out 50% of the parking, I could see that negatively affecting driver behavior. But if we're talking about taking out 10% of the parking, it's hard to imagine that would have a huge effect. I certainly have had the experience of trying to step out into a crosswalk when there is a car directly to my left, and knowing that a car parked directly to my left, a large car sometimes, knowing that there are other cars just beyond it that I can't see and they can't see me. I'm sort of poking my head out, peeking around the corner, just like you said. That's a very familiar experience, and I don't want anybody to have that experience. I don't want the seniors to have that experience. I don't want the children to have that experience. If we leave the status quo as it is today, a lot of people aren't going to be able to park directly in front of the church because it's going to be full. And those people will have to cross the street. And if we leave that crossing unsafe, it seems to me like it's a terrible a problem that we just can't choose to perpetuate that problem. I think if any place needs to be subject to the city policy to make the crossing safe, this seems like should be a high priority for it. The question of drop-off zones is interesting, and I do think something that should be considered. It might be difficult if the time of day and time of the week that it needs to be enforced is very different from other drop-off zones. Usually people expect traffic enforcement to happen during weekday daytimes, and they think that on Sunday there's no traffic enforcement. And if we put in a white zone for drop-off for the church service on Sunday, it might be hard for us to get it enforced. If the police department didn't have the staff at that time of the week, it also people might just not understand that it was meant to be enforced at that time. So I think we'd have to be very careful in the way we plan out the white zone, but that would be for a future agenda item.
All right, so, I think.
And it is 10 o'clock, so.
Right, so I'm in favor of doing the red curbs. However, the neighbors can always go to the city council and address this again, because we're just making a recommendation to the city council. And perhaps in our motion, we can encourage the city to look at doing some parking management at that intersection, which is really a distinct problem from solving this physical problem. But it sounds like it needs to be done.
Can I have a motion to extend the meeting till, for at least 15 more minutes?
10:30?
10:30?
Okay, I'll second that. I'll make a motion on this item to approve.
Let's just say.
Oh, sorry, yeah. we need to-
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay.
We have a quorum of our quorum.
Yes. So on this item, I would recommend approval of the staff recommendation with the note, two notes, that staff may come back to the commission to talk about parking management on the frontage of the church, and that it was noted that there's a drain outlet to the curb on Curtis between the curb ramp and the first tree, which looks like it would hit pretty much smack in the curb inlet. So hopefully the water would just flow into that, but that would have to be accounted for in the design.
Okay. I think that's motion. I'll second that motion.
Okay, any further discussion?
Commissioner Barnes?
Yes.
Commissioner Javindal? Chair Chomsky?
Yes. Okay, that's motion approved. And that concludes the, what is it, 1501 Washington?
I'm already.
Okay, so 602 Santa Fe, or as mentioned in January, there's a camphor tree here that did damage to the sidewalk, curb, gutter, road. And really, to keep this tree intact, we had to ramp up the sidewalk. It's a bit of an interesting design with a retaining wall and curb. We're going to expand the landscaping strip to give the roots more room, and this includes a minor bulb in the street just to make sure we avoid hitting the trunk and roots adjacent to the trunk when we're doing street work and digging. So there's some red curb here per policy as well as per vehicle code. I'll get into why we are red curbing for this project. So let me bring up this highlighter again. As I mentioned, we are bulbing out slightly. It's just about 2 feet. So this is normally without parking. It was about an 18 feet to center line. We're reducing it to about 16 feet. So when a car is parked here, we're looking at it's a car that's normally maybe 7 to 9 feet parked width, but now we have an extra 2 feet because of the bulb out. So to really make sure that we're keeping the curb ramp visible with kind of a wider obstruction, we're proposing to do the 20 feet per policy at the approach. Now again, since we are slightly narrowing the road to the center line, it'll be 16 feet. So with a car parked there, it could be anywhere between 11 to 9 feet. So in case, particularly if there's an emergency vehicle coming through the intersection and it can't stay within the center line, we want to make sure there's room on the opposite side for a car to pull out. And there's a fire hydrant there, so we're just going to paint per state vehicle code, which is no person shall park within 15 feet of a hydrant. So that would be 25 feet of red curb from crosswalk. That's really it for this one. If you have some more questions or need some more clarification, let me know. But ultimately, we're recommending an approval per policy to 20 feet on approach and then 25 feet on the opposite side per state vehicle code.
Any questions from the commission?
No, no questions.
Public comment?
I have one question.
You have a question?
Yep, sorry. Not quick on the update. I'm lulled to sleep in the kitchen. It turns out, if I remember correctly, the street sign for the street name sign with numbering notation is wrong at the northwest corner of this intersection. What does this project trigger updating the street sign?
No, but we'll bring that up to maintenance. They handle the signs.
Actually, I have a list from when I did the census. I'll get back to you, Allison. Yeah, okay.
Doesn't have to be approved by the commission. Okay, any other questions? Public comment? Anybody online?
I don't see any hands raised online.
Okay, discussion?
I think it makes sense, and the fire hydrant seems like it's not even up to us. That's fire code, vehicle code too, but.
I apologize. In my delirium from the kitchen, I missed your explanation of what we were doing about red curbing or not along the tree bulb out.
So as it stands, we're not proposing any red curb there unless commission thinks, would recommend otherwise. Like I said, it's a pretty minor bulb out. It's just 2 feet on a rather wide road. Just to the center line, it's 18 feet being reduced to 16 feet. It's about a 36-foot wide road, curb to curb.
Right, so there's no painted
T markings?
T markings or parking stripe at this time?
No.
You basically still have a 10-foot wide traffic lane, which is plenty.
I just wonder if it depends on the size of the vehicle you park there. That's my hesitation.
They paint an edge line.
Are we expecting people to park like on the diagonal, along the diagonal parts of the path there, or just like some people park farther west and then some people is it one car length along the bulb out?
Yes, I don't have the dimensions here, but I remember measuring earlier, there's about one car could fit on the bulb out, one car can fit on adjacent to the driveway, and a very small car could fit between the red curb and the bulb out closer to the intersection.
Mm-hmm. But if somebody tried to park a regular sized car in the easternmost spot and they left the back side of the car sticking out, would that stick out more than?
So this would
be diagonal.
This would be kind of drivers using their best judgment. Per vehicle code, you are supposed to park, I don't know the exact length from the curb. So if you're just hanging off I would assume that they would use their best judgment not to drive. And if you believe otherwise, we can red curb more, but we're just going through the policy, which is 20 feet.
Yeah. I guess I am a little concerned that someone could park legally with their back wheel right at the curve point and within the 18 inches of the curb at that point where it sticks out the most, sort of at the rightmost edge of the bulb out before the S. And that then the back of the car would protrude into the street a little more than we expect. But if it's a wide enough street, that wouldn't be a problem. So.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, if you're parked along the bulb, you're probably, narrowing it down to about 9 feet from the center line to that parked car. So theoretically, if they are legally parked and still nudged out a bit, it would be no more than a car that was parked along the bulb out in terms of how much they're into the street. Just might look a little bizarre.
So Thousand Oaks, it turns out, is a fairly trafficked street. Probably not as much as Santa Fe, but it gets a lot of traffic because of its connection to Key Route and Brighton. If we wanted to be really cautious, we might paint a white line to show the edge of the parking area.
Yeah.
And I realize that's maybe non-standard, and it's not done elsewhere on the street.
We would have to design the shape of the white line, right? It would have to bulb out with the curb.
Well, you could keep it very simple. I don't know, Fareed, you could paint a white line that ended in some dots just along the bulb out. I don't know. What do you think in general?
Yeah, I think that, the white line for the length of the bulb out is all that's needed. You don't have to go beyond that. Whether you do a tight return on that or just kind of really make it more of a gradual return from the bulb out. I don't know that that's necessarily going to change anything relative to what Harry's talking about in terms of 18 inches from the curb.
I'm less worried about being next to the curb than just being out in the traffic.
No, I think doing edge line 8 feet out from the bulb still leaves you with a 10-foot traffic lane, which per the traditional fire lane of 20 feet, 10 feet on either side of the center line would seem like that's plenty for emergency vehicles, not to mention passenger cars. And we got plenty of streets that are narrower than that.
So I'm looking at my notes, I may have misspoke. From center line to a parked car, and if they're parked along the bulb out, it would possibly neck it down between 9 to 7 feet, which is what I'm saying, why an emergency vehicle would go over. Still.
Yeah. Still not a big concern for a localized pinch point. I mean, even an emergency lane can pinch down for that amount of distance. I don't know. It just doesn't seem like it's a huge issue, and an edge line would certainly be sufficient. Your average car is 6 feet wide. You can do a parking lane anywhere from 7 to 8 feet wide.
So bother with an edge line or not?
Honestly, I feel like it's overkill, but.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
We could always put it there later if it turns out to be a problem. It's an easy fix.
Yeah.
So I'm inclined to approve the staff recommendation as a motion.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Okay, can we have a roll call?
Commissioner Javindal?
Aye.
Commissioner McCroskey?
Aye.
Chair Chomsky?
Yes. Thank you.
You've got a new ethnicity.
We can bring Michael back in. That concludes item 5-3.
Oh, I was just going to give you a real quick update about the sidewalk program.
Great.
Okay, great. Let's wait for Michael.
So just a quick update on the program. We are looking to start construction for Phase 7 in June or July, probably more in July. It was originally scheduled earlier, but the contractor we awarded, due to some schedule conflicts, it's being pushed back a little bit. The next progress update for the program, similar to the update provided in January, will be when we come to the final approval for the Phase 8 locations, which will be either June or July commission. And to kind of reiterate what I mentioned in January, or the end of this year, we'll have repaired just about all of our critical locations, other than those that we're putting to Marin Phase 2. We're rethinking the prioritization criteria since we'll have now gotten those critical repairs out of the way. We just, I think tomorrow, actually, we'll have just finished the third Zone 3 of sidewalk shaving. So by 2025, we'll have done a full citywide 5-zone of shaving. And we'll probably do our next comprehensive sidewalk survey in 2025, scheduled for 2026 per, the long-term plan, but we want to kind of jump in right away once our sidewalks are done with critical repairs and done shaving, so we can get a nice, quick, nice, accurate picture. And that's it.
Thank you. Okay, so
The shavers were out in my neighborhood the other day. It was good to see them.
Good to hear it. Good to stop sharing.
any further discussion about 5-3? Okay. Is 5-4 like a 5-minute item, or is it something we should postpone to a later meeting?
I'm happy to speed through it quickly, and I'm also happy to give it to you next month. I don't think it's critical. It's probably a 10-minute presentation if I'm going at my normal speed.
Yeah, I would.
10:30. I guess I would ask what the next meeting looks like in terms of load.
We are anticipating the ACTC, Alameda County Transportation Commission, San Pablo Avenue projects presentation next month. It's not definite, but we're anticipating that presentation. Beyond that, I'm not sure yet. So we at least have one substantial item. This one is not time sensitive. If you want to wait, it is a late hour for us to take up a new discussion item, but we're happy to do it.
There's no action expected by this commission on related to the CAP. So it doesn't really matter when we discuss it. My inclination is to postpone. So
That's fine. Already kept everyone here quite a bit longer than we needed.
So let's postpone the climate action adaptation plan discussion for a future meeting. Announcements? I know you mentioned you had one.
I have, yes, the Climate Action Committee has been discussing their priorities for transportation, and their Zero Energy Transportation Subcommittee is having a meeting on Monday, May 15th at 8. And in order to avoid Brown Act issues, they would like to invite one member of this commission to join them at that meeting to provide perspective and background from our commission's perspective. I'm going to be out of town. So that's Monday, May 15th at 8.
Who's been around the longest?
Yeah, if I haven't been here for very long, and neither has Michael. Are you interested? Or?
I think so. I need to double check my schedule, but sounds like an okay date. So tentatively, sure.
I can put you in touch with them.
Okay.
And if it doesn't work, you can pop it back out to staff and go from there. So I'll follow up on that. Thank you. Just that staff may be announcing the expo happening on Saturday.
Go ahead.
Looks like a really good event on Saturday from 10 to 2 at the community center. Many local nonprofits and governmental bodies will be there. including, and I think we all got a request to potentially participate in the commissions and committees table. I'm already at 3 or 4 other tables, so I'm not going to be at that one. But food trucks, talks, tables.
Governmental bodies.
Sorry?
Governmental bodies.
Governmental. Well, this wouldn't be the but anyway. Yes.
I'll be there. Come say hi.
I will be available to answer questions as a member of this commission. I just won't be at the actual governmental bodies table, but you can send them my way at the strollers and rollers table.
Well,
Oh, well, before our next meeting, we're expecting Bike to Work Day in Albany, happening on May 18th from 7 to 9 a.m. And we've picked the, going back to the location at Marin and Masonic. And at least I believe enough of that, I haven't actually checked in with Public Works, but I believe that enough of that intersection will be implemented by that time to show off some of the new features and to at least talk about it. And I've extended this offer to community development, but of course, Public Works would be welcome to come and discuss with the public what's there if you choose. We'd love to include you if you chose.
And I just had a few quick announcements if I can also jump in. So that was the first one, so thank you, Ken. Second one I had a link to, so I put it up on a slide, is that AC Transit is launching their system-wide review of bus service labeled AC Transit Realign, and they've noticed at some of the bus stops out there, but also just mentioning here that they're soliciting input through a survey to get it kicked off, and that website provides more information.
I neglected to mention that I went to a AC Transit breakfast with Council Vice Chair Mickey, and it's clear that changes are coming in terms of what AC Transit can provide and their revenues. And they're taking this opportunity to really look at what they're providing to whom and where. So this is a great opportunity to provide input to that. We in Albany lack bus service to Pierce Street currently, and it's very unlikely that the exact same bus would be re-implemented. I'm actually not sure that would be appropriate or what we would want, but this is our chance to give input to what's needed.
When is the date and time again? When is?
So this survey is currently open.
Oh, okay.
Also briefly, 3 relevant items for this commission are coming to City Council on Monday. One is a second reading of an ordinance that would add student and student-affiliated representation to the Transportation Commission. So we'll be looking at adding 2 new seats onto the commission with that action. Second is that traffic calming speed humps are proposed for installation with approval of a change order to an existing contract. So that's coming to council on Monday. And the third is that Councilmember Jordan has a proposal to prepare a bill proposal to allow contraflow parking on Keynes and Adams, which was a recommendation affiliated with the pilot from this body. So just a heads up.
It's a recommendation to the state legislature, right?
It would be to prepare a state bill, yes. And then finally, I was just going to give an update. The street tree inventory work is wrapping up, and we have a street tree management plan, RFP, that's open and out, and then submittals are being taken through tomorrow. And so that next phase should proceed quickly after the inventory.
Will that plan have visibility to this commission?
The Parks Rec Open Space Committee will be the main advisory body, but we have related interest at Climate Action and Transportation Commission, so we'll work with the consultants on how to incorporate feedback from all of the advisory bodies that touch it. But we're envisioning Parks Rec and Open Space being the main lead body on the plan.
Sure.
Any other announcements? A word about future agenda items. We've already talked about what you're expecting for next month. Any other items to mention?
I'm interested in discussing forming a subcommittee to coordinate with the climate goal, to discuss the climate goals and to coordinate with the Climate Action Committee Zero Energy Transportation Subcommittee. As I think we need to explore the Brown Act implications and see if that makes sense.
So would that have to be an agenda item for us just to declare our intent to form that subcommittee, or are you declaring your intent right now?
I defer to staff.
I actually don't know the answer to that. Generally, for actions, it's something that needs to be on the agenda. I don't know if a purely organizational action has any different rules. So I would, barring knowing anything different, I would say we should agendize it for a future meeting.
It's also a way that we haven't worked in the past, so I think it bears discussing and exploring just a bit.
If it involves two subcommittees from two advisory bodies, I think it would be involving new staffed Brown Act meetings.
Well, in our training, and I looked this up, we were told that ad hoc committees that had a specific purpose and sunset, not necessarily a date, but a sunset after a process, do not require, it was not made clear in the notes that I took, if two commissions/committees could have a combined committee without daylight.
With a future agendized meeting, I will
Yeah.
prepare
well,
the information for you to have
Question for the
options.
city attorney.
Yes.
Anything else in the category of future agenda items? Okay, our next meeting will be Thursday, May 25th at 7 p.m. And this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.